o'clock, we'll call the November 30th meeting to order, and we'll start off with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, we'll start off with the approval of minutes. They've been read and reviewed.
So moved.
Second?
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, and that's unanimous. Next one, small project, NACC number 180, 88 Duncan Drive.
Right, I let the applicant know on this one. We didn't need him to attend. You've seen this before. If you recall, Duncan Drive, he's the one with the conservation restricted property next to him. He had him put up the wall and move the shed and all that good stuff. His contractor came in recently asking about redoing the stairs and walkway at the front of the house. The stairs themselves are out of just clipping the 100, and the walkway is within the 100, so replacing in kind. I don't think we need any erosion control, given the wall and it being on the other side of the driveway. So just a post-construction inspection to make sure everything is as proposed when done.
I have none.
No questions.
No questions?
I move that we consider this to be a small project under letter L.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, and that's unanimous.
And accordingly, I move that we approve the project as proposed, with any discretionary authority that the administrator needs on site.
We just
Green
lost.
post, just post-construction and inspection.
Whatever she wants.
So, yeah, Al with post-construction. Yep.
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Opposed, and that's unanimous.
Who seconded the first motion?
What's easier for you?
It's the same, just,
Okay.
Pick a name.
we'll do Jack and Al tonight, Al and Jack or whatever.
Well, we do have these TV things going on, so, there's a record of this.
What are you gonna
We're
do?
not-
What are you gonna do, fire us?
We're all set.
All right, next one is, which you'll recuse yourself.
Why
It's,
does it keep, it keeps
Oh,
uncasting?
no, that's not the right one.
Which one is
Okay.
this?
No, we have one on here for,
That's not me.
no, but there is, you are.
Down, I'll find it for
Yeah,
you.
you're further down. 148?
Further down?
Yeah, this
No.
is Sutton Pond
I don't see it.
condominiums.
It's not on, where is it?
I know it was not, we talked about it.
Right, I'm looking for the address, but I'm not seeing it.
Maybe they took it off.
I don't see it on there.
Yeah, Main
Okay.
Street. Oh.
Main Street, so this is behind Town Hall, right
No, I know,
behind
we're
here.
talking about the
We
other
were
Main
trying to
Street.
search in case I
Oh,
had
that says COC at the end of the meeting.
I don't even see it.
I don't even see it.
Oh, there it is.
So
Under
I'll
general
say it.
business.
Okay.
Very bad.
General
Oh, yeah,
business,
okay. Okay.
126.
All right, we got it,
Gotcha.
we got it. All right, 148 Main Street, Sutton Pond condos.
So this is a proposal to replace the water main that's out there. Do you want to use this plan? You want to use the aerial?
Good evening, Phil Corbett with CM Engineers. I'm Moriarty with the condominium board. So Sutton Pond condos developed in the early 80s. The original developer went bankrupt. Another developer came in and kind of patched things together and left a water main that wasn't built entirely properly. And they've had more and more frequent issues with it, and recently a few breaks. And when it breaks, there's several non-working valves in the area, so they have to extend out to get, the town has to go out actually in High Street and shut it down, which affects all the condo residents as well as some adjacent water customers. And then when it's broken, they have to have the fire department there and pay $1,800 a day, and it's disruptive with the emergency repairs. So they are requesting to replace the section of water main that's been problematic and initially install some valves so that they can better isolate the areas that have been a problem and not shut everyone down when they do have to make a repair and if they do have any future breaks. So the entire project is within the paved parking lot limits. So we've proposed the 600 feet section of 8-inch and 6-inch water main will be constructed conventionally with open cut excavation and provided, temporary erosion controls, silt fence along the perimeter of the parking lot, as well as protecting the catch basins. And then recently got a request today for a different type of dewatering basins. We came up with a detail for that. That's the hay bale and stone and filter fabric that they would use if they encountered groundwater, which they hadn't previously, but they would have that ready on hand if that happened during excavation.
So this is exempt under the Wetlands Protection Act if all the work is in pavement. If you plan to cover the trench daily?
Yes,
which
that's the plan.
Is it exempt if it's not in the public right of way?
Yeah, it says
It's
It's a right of way, yes, sir.
it says driveways, roadways,
Okay.
yep.
Yep.
It's one way coming in from Main Street.
So it is within the driveway.
Okay, I know it's in pavement, for sure, but yeah, I
Yep.
thought it meant.
No,
public.
it doesn't
rights
say
of way?
public right of way, it says
Okay.
driveways. So if
Okay.
you trench on private property as well.
So they're hopeful that the window of construction this season is rapidly closing, but if they get approval tonight, then they could potentially install those valves so they're not having to shut down 400 people or more every time there is an issue, and then and maybe even get some of this work done this year. But there is some urgency in trying to get this work done.
And private roadways, driveways is in the exemption.
Thank you. No, that was just on I was challenging the exemption question. I thought it was in public roadways. Is the proposed reconfiguration of the water been already approved by the water department, DPW water department?
Yep, we've talked to them, and they're just hopeful that we can get the work done, because they have to come out and shut down public valves anytime there's a disruption here.
Well, I understand the
Talk to Tim.
inconvenience. I'm just looking at, it seems to me that the meandering of the water main is to keep it within pavement and not minimize the disturbance of curbing and off-roadway.
Yeah, I mean,
type of work.
it'll follow a similar alignment as the existing one, and yes.
With
within
every,
the
with
drop
every
aisle.
kink and curve is a potential problem in a water main, we all know. And so again, if they've approved it, then I have no problem with that. During construction, is there bypass piping, or are you looking to, how do you keep
Yep,
all
they
the
would have-
residents online? And
yeah.
where is the bypass piping going?
They would have to shut down the entire complex to do the initial work to install some valves so they can better control and isolate the system. And then, once they do that, they can bypass pipe from a fire hydrant to temporarily provide service.
And where is that going? The bypass piping, because it's not shown on the plans?
Yeah, it's just on the west side of the building, and it would be above ground, bypass connection into their service. So it wouldn't be excavation required to do that work.
So I guess let me ask the question a different way. It's not going to be any closer to the wetland area than
No.
the existing
No,
water
it'd
main
be the far end from
proposal?
Osgood Pond connection. There's
Side of the building, actually.
yeah.
And stockpile of materials, so spoil that comes out, and any suitable materials they're gonna stockpile for backfilling. So you're gonna have stone, and you're gonna backfill gravel and whatnot. Where's that proposed to go?
Yeah,
Where are you gonna store that
They
during?
would have a minimal stockpile of sand, for bedding, I suppose, and they could do that within the paved parking lot limits.
I said not within 100 feet of the buffer zone, or riverfront.
So we'd want to be careful of its protection of, catch basin inlets.
They have all that on the plan already.
Okay. And the hope is this season, which is over.
Well, at least initially get the first piece of this work done, which would be to put the new gate valves in so they don't have to shut down the entire complex and some adjacent customers when they do a shutdown. That would give them some control over the winter and a little bit more security. So that would be the hope initially, and then we'd see how the forecast looks here. It's touch and go as you get into December.
Okay, I'm all set.
How deep is the cut for the pipe?
Water main is usually 5 feet to the top of pipe.
Okay. And Jenny, they gave you a dewatering plan? Because that's what I was looking for.
I downloaded it, but it's the standard detail.
Okay.
It's not the filter bag?
No, he, so we got, just tonight, he sent the revised detail. This is our standard.
When you do the pre-construction, like Joe reflected on the stockpile, designate the area so when she does the pre-construction, she knows where it is.
Sure.
So they, I didn't get to read because it came late, but they submitted something regarding, I'm guessing the other is the location?
Oh, that's just the, just the dewatering basin area.
Where you propose to put it?
Which, I think there's flexibility in where that goes as well, but we just put it on that landscaped island right there. It's kind of in the middle.
Oh, yeah, see it in the,
Yep.
Okay.
So it just takes the suspended solids out and just lets the water flow across the pipe?
Yeah, it'd be,
to the spaces?
hay bales with gravel and filter fabric that would,
I think you
filter.
could even move it closer to the, on the pond side of the parking lot if you moved the erosion control out. That way it's not running across the parking lot, potentially freezing if you're doing this in the winter. It would make more sense to have it on the pond side and move the line of a, it's, sorry, I don't know what's going on, but this keeps going out.
Well, you could designate the dewatering area in pre-construction.
Yeah, sorry, trying to get this back. But you can see Sutton Pond's right here, and then there's the whole big grassed area. If they just move their erosion control out a little bit and put the dewatering basin there, then everything would filter through 2 rows of hay bales and then into the pond, but not flow over the parking area, which in their current location it would do.
I think they put it there from looking at just because it was centrally located.
yep. Yeah, I mean,
Maybe.
I could see a couple trains of thought, but it's going into a deep catch basin there that'll be protected, but nobody's sure exactly where that discharges to, so.
Okay, well, we can discuss in the field if it makes
Sure.
more
So
sense.
that's a pre-construction. I mean, the
Yeah.
reality is that's going to move as the trenching progresses. So it doesn't, I don't think there's going to be one location. I think there's probably going to be several locations as, their excavation dictates.
Okay.
But what I'm seeing is there's ample options available.
Yeah, why do you expect it to take 4 weeks?
It's a little unknown what's there because of the way the project was originally built. So it's not entirely clear-cut as they're going to go along and excavate what they're going to encounter from some existing utilities and other things. I think that's on the outside. I think the total work for 600 feet of water main, it could be less than that, but getting mobilized and kind of very start of initiating project to getting everything cleaned up is probably within the 2 to 4 week window.
So we did get, late today, actually, you haven't gotten to Doug, so I'll present that in a minute.
Okay. I guess my question is, how long do you expect to have disturbed pavement within the ways?
Yeah, I would think that if everything goes well, I mean, you can do anywhere from 1 to 250 feet of pipe a day,
See,
so
that's, yeah.
600 feet. It's hopefully all buttoned up in a couple weeks, but yeah, 4 weeks was kind of the out-to-out
Okay, all right,
duration.
not a big issue. Go ahead.
It's interesting, you've gone out to bids on the project yet?
We have a contractor that's worked with the condominiums before that is
ready to go.
engaged in the project, yep.
And how are you gonna pave the trenches? Aren't the plants closed?
No, I mean, again, it depends, we have to, yep, yep,
They're still open?
yeah.
Yeah, there's always one plant at Region open year-round.
They charge you winter.
Really?
Yeah. So it's weather dependent as well. I mean, all the plants are open now, and then as it gets worse and worse, they'll and have fewer paving days, they'll start to close down.
All right. Other than that, I have no questions.
So, Mr. Smith, who's the abutter at 146 Main Street and known to the commission from the sewer pump issue, submitted a letter today. Most of the points, as I read the letter, pertain to the sewer pump issue and somehow imply that we can't permit this project without dealing with that issue. I view that as an entirely separate matter. You can look at that and make your own determination. The only issue that I see that he brought up that is probably relevant is your abutter notification. Said the plans were available at 1600 Osgood Street, which is our old address, and not here. Although he contacted me and I emailed him the plans, so I don't view it as an impediment, but it could be possible that he could appeal based on that. I don't really know what DEP would say about.
Lack of notice, an appeal for lack of notice would mean he legitimately did not have to know.
He knew.
The fact
so
that he contacted you and talked about it and is aware of the hearing tonight constitutes notice. Whether he got it directly or indirectly, he has been notified.
So-
And I don't believe he's here tonight.
Oh, it's not.
He says in the
He said
letter
he
that he
couldn't
won't be attending.
Wanna read it?
His packet's actually twice as big as the
But
the
it doesn't,
application.
it doesn't,
His objection is as to notice. Is that correct?
that's his, I think his only viable objection. I think there are other objections in there, but
Yeah,
they don't.
the sewer is
The
irrelevant. in
sewer
what we're
issue
doing.
is definitely something that's still of concern to this commission in the need to be replaced and all that, but I'm not really sure how it affects the water main.
All right.
They're two different systems.
I'm not gonna pretend to be an attorney, and maybe we can ask town council to follow up, but I'm looking at the section where the plans are available. And clearly, it's our form, and it says 1600 Osgood Street, but more important is it says, please call the Conservation Department at, given a phone number, before hearing to verify arrangements. So by giving the phone number, which hasn't changed,
It has.
I think the notice is adequate. Because you've directed people to call first, don't just come to an address.
Right.
So I think the notice is adequate.
Seems to me the only question you have is if somebody tried to get the copies of the plans and went to 1600 Osgood Street and is confused, and Chris, you didn't get any calls relative to that, but it would be somebody else, not this particular individual, because he's aware of it. He's been notified, and and we know he's been notified, so he can't claim non-notification. Somebody else could come walking in and say, I don't know what happened, I tried to get information, couldn't get it. So that's I think, the concern.
Just
Actually, the other piece is the posting.
all of his
We want-
arguments seem to
Where do we post them now?
have to do with the sewage.
We have to rework this about a notification.
It's all
form.
been reworked. I don't know, you probably got that before we actually moved, or maybe just after we moved, but
Okay.
everything's updated on the
Okay.
website now. We confirmed that today. We pulled them up. What we give out in the office all says 120 Main Street. There's nothing wrong with the form now. Heidi rechecked it after.
Well, knowing what we do about this abutter and what appears to be some issues with regard to challenge, I'm not gonna say appeal, but on challenge, I think we ought to be certain we dot the i's and cross the t's. I think it's fine.
I'll check with
I think
council tomorrow.
I think the notice that says it's posted at Town Hall, 16 Osgood Street, I think that's a flaw.
It was posted at Town Hall.
But it doesn't, but
It was
1600
posted-
Osgood.
it would-
oh, I'm missing the comma.
Yep.
Town Hall, 120 Main Street, and the offices at 1600. So, all right, we got at least one, right? And it only needs to be in one place.
Right. And it was online, too.
Okay, so that's fine. Yeah, I checked with council just to make sure we're
Okay.
bulletproof on appeal.
Joe, read paragraph 3. Read paragraph 3 of the...
Yeah, I read this thing just ever so
Paragraph
briefly.
3 says, "I have received a notification of this meeting."
This is it. What he's saying is
I'm
this.
sorry, I have received a notification. I think the only thing we should be considering is the application on its merits, on its face. I don't have any problem with notification at any level. What we should be looking at is just the merits of the application, up or down.
All right. So, we have a, so we need any more questions? Regardless of the letter, you want to read it? So we need a motion.
So if we were, let me just hypothetically ask, if we were to close tonight, are we capable of issuing a decision tonight?
This is a determination.
It's
You're
an
issuing it.
RDA.
Yeah.
It's an IDA.
And it's exempt under the act, so the appeal of an RDA,
It would be a local bylaw issue.
appeal of an RDA is still through the court, local
Superior Court.
Well, it seems that if he wants to screw things up, he can always file an appeal and with the courts, and they'll do whatever they're gonna do.
You know what? Exactly right. There's, I'm confident enough that the direction on the notification, if anybody wanted to see plans, they were directed to call first. He did call. So the issue of whether you're at 1600 Osgood Street or not anymore is not germane, has no bearing.
Well, the only thing it would do is hold up the project. Now, if the project isn't done in December, it's not done until the spring, what happens?
Well, there's just the potential of breaks through the winter and emergency repairs and disruption.
So repair of a
And
water
we don't
line,
know if that will happen or not.
repair of a water line is exempt under both the act and the bylaw. Repair. So if you wanted to go in and repair those valves, you have every right to do so.
Just speaking to the delaying the approval, yeah, it's costly and disruptive and fire
Right,
department's
and
there.
that's regardless of,
We can just approve the idea.
I think just approve it.
Yeah.
All
Let
we
it-
can
let
do
it-
is
let it fall
approve the
in-
no, but I'm
RDA.
saying if they
confident
want to
in
go
that.
and do the valves, they can go and do the valves.
Don't break it into
We
pieces.
can't control whether there'll be an appeal or not.
What do you want us to do tonight? You have an abutter that is a potential burden under your saddle. How do you want to handle it?
So you could wait 2 weeks and re-notify with the
You can
form that's
re-notify and wait
corrected.
2 weeks, and then take.
Yeah, no, I think, given the date today, it would be more favorable to get approval tonight, and then if...
Yeah, because then after that, it's what,
Yep,
4
I think
weeks?
you'd be...
You can also start work tomorrow. An appeal would take time.
So you'd be at your
To
peril,
file
you understand,
even.
right?
There's no waiting period on an RDA.
Don, you understand that predicament? I'm not...
I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
So,
So, it-
So help us understand, do you want us to approve it and send it ahead, or do you want to wait 2 weeks and be prudent?
I would prefer to get started, sir, if I may. Don Moriarty, I happen to be president of the association here at Sutton Pond. We have had in the past year and a half or so 3 breaks. This has cost the community well over $40,000. So, one of the lines was noted that it's really, was never reconstructed from the original mill. And we want to get as much done as we can and get this job done. You have a community of 188 units, and when we have a break, and I got to point out, Tim Willette's crew, Water Department, have been just tremendous help. But they've got to shut down from both, there's 2 feeds, High Street and Main Street, shutting down the entire complex. What they're proposing initially is to put this valve in so that once they've done that, the feed from High Street will continue feeding the back buildings, which is the majority of the population. The front buildings, which are referred to as Abbott and Osgood, we get a temporary feed from a hydrant on the east end of Abbott for water source after this valve is put in, so that this valve, if need be, could be shut down and wouldn't close down the whole complex. And it's just,
We just wanted to make sure you understood, we don't question your need.
No, I
Sure
appreciate
that you
that very
understand that
much.
you might want to be prudent or not.
I'm not, I've been there 21 years and been putting up with,
Okay,
so.
I got you.
All right, so who makes a motion?
So, I'm gonna let Joe, I'll let Joe make the motion.
Oh, we need an approval of the waiver not to delineate the wetlands. Given that all the work was in pavement, it doesn't really matter where the wetlands are. There's
So I
no,
move that we waive the regulation requirement to delineate the wetlands as all work is proposed within existing pavement and the limits of the wetland are not pertinent to this application.
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Opposed? And one abstention.
Okay, and I also then move that we consider this, issue a negative determination to allow the work to construct in accordance with the plans of record, those as part of this application, the supplemental plans received this afternoon.
so it's a negative number 3 and a number 5 for the exemption.
Yes,
Also a positive 2B for no delineation of the wetland.
that, I couldn't have said it better myself.
Motion and a,
Second.
all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That's unanimous, minus one abstention.
Yep. And the special conditions on that would be a pre-construction inspection of the erosion control. I'm sorry, what else did I say in there?
The approval of the dewatering.
Approval of the dewatering location and the
And stock-
post-construction
and
inspection.
stockpile
No
within stock-
stockpiling within 100 feet.
You're gonna.
I'll write that up, though.
You're
So
gonna
you'll-
designate the stockpile.
Great.
They're gonna show you where they wanna put it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next one is, ANRAD, 242, no DEP number, 185 Gray Pond Road.
So, Greg is not here, so we ask that we table his matters until he arrives. He's at another meeting tonight.
Okay. We'll table. Next one is, we have, let's see. We have one continuance, 242-1688, 30 Ironwood Road, request to continue to December 14th.
So moved.
Second?
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, and that's unanimous. Next one is 242, no DP, number 50 Wellcrest Drive. Surprised to see you tonight.
How are you?
Good, how you doing?
Good evening, members of the commission. Kenneth Lanier, Cornerstone Land Consultants, representing Aimco Royal Crest Estates this evening before you. And I have to say that I've not been very well at communicating with Mrs. Hughes, even though she's gone above and beyond reaching out to me in regards to this project. Royal Crest has kind of fallen into some dilemmas with the Board of Health over the past couple of months that have been keeping me quite busy. I don't know if you folks have had a chance to review the property at all, but we're out there redoing that pond and trying to make it part of the drainage system that we all know is well
You
overtaxed.
started the pond work?
The RDA for the pond
Yeah.
work?
We
Yes,
didn't
ma'am.
have any kind of pre-construction about it.
Yeah, I thought we did.
Yeah, okay. We'll talk about that later.
Ah, all right. I apologize.
I haven't been out.
Ultimately, we did start the pond work, and the only reason we started the pond work, and again, was the property was under the order of the Board of Health. So this evening, I know that Jen was a little disappointed in our ability to provide the information, which again, I'll take complete blame for. And I'd like to withdraw the application and ultimately reapply under a new application. I think there's some issues going on out there with the wetland, the way that we had defined it on the original ANRAD. Our hope was to come in before the commission with a full notice of intent filing under both the state and the local bylaw. But I think when we did the ANRAD originally back in 2012, we identified this wetland area on the side as a bordering vegetated wetland. and I don't believe that it is. It is actually,
No. It's bordering. That's the wetland behind, what's the street up above?
Montero Way.
Yeah, that's bordering.
On what?
Well, one, the channel that outlets, that's an intermittent stream.
But it isn't. It's an actual drainage
Yeah, it's too
swale.
old to be an actual drainage channel. It's an intermittent stream. You border. It
Okay.
borders.
And again, this is stuff that I was
We can
hoping to
work that
get
out, but-
in touch with Jen about, and I didn't have an opportunity to, so, and again, that's why I'm hoping to just withdraw, refile, so I can get all our ducks squared away and in a row, and, hopefully be able to get this approved to you guys in the near future, if that's feasible. Jen, if that's all right.
That's up to them.
Yeah.
I move that we allow the applicant to withdraw without prejudice.
And a second. All those in favor?
Discussion?
Discussion, absolutely.
Jen, is there anything else that we should know before we move on this?
I mean, it wasn't filed correctly with us. When he filed, he submitted the plans from last time, which hadn't been updated. It was supposed to be a new plan. So we had been sort of holding a spot on the agenda for this, expecting the new plan. And it was supposed to go to, I don't think DEP's received it, because in 3 months, they have not issued a file number, which has not happened on any other project, so something's amiss there. And it was supposed to go to stormwater review per your request, and that hasn't happened either. So, I mean, it just basically isn't before you properly at this point, so I have no problem with the withdrawal.
Well, in our discussion, I understand, maybe most people do understand, without prejudice, that speaks to the local fee only. DEP's not gonna refund their filing fee.
That may be why they never issued a second file number.
Maybe they never got it to begin with, you mean, perhaps.
I don't know.
I don't know either.
They had issued a file number last time.
Right. I'm completely fine with the fee requirement.
But our filing fee is supposed to be commensurate to the level of administrative burden that we've been undertaken in moving this thing along. In the course of have you just been holding the space on the agenda? You haven't been doing any real work on it.
Well, just reaching out, trying to,
Yeah.
Get contact kind of thing.
So without prejudice, releasing the filing fee as well is something you're not
We don't release
objecting
the
to.
filing fee, just when he refiles, we won't have him repay the fee,
Okay.
if that's what his intention is.
Okay, I'm okay with that.
And let me just ask, since we're discussing, I think I know the answer, but when and if he comes in to refile, it sounds like he plans to redelineate. So then there would be field work at that point. How is that
If he's going to
handled?
claim that it's IVW versus BVW, then we're going to meet out there and discuss that. I don't think it changes the limits of the actual wetland. It just changes what he's trying to call it.
Well, ultimately, it could change something.
It could. There's actually a stream that leaves that channel as well. That's the stream at the other end.
Since we don't have a file before us. when
It's
it
not
comes in,
worth
you're gonna
discussing,
you're gonna
but we'll
review the
go
line-
out there.
you're gonna review the line as you
I-
would any
Nothing in front of
application.
us, that's right.
Completely
Okay.
agree.
It's subject to review.
Subject to, okay.
All right, so we have a motion and
And we had a second from Sean.
all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That's unanimous.
I appreciate it. Sorry for any inconvenience.
That's okay.
Thank you.
I'm gonna
I'd get
come out
caught
and
up
see the
on that
pond.
other thing, Ken.
Unless Heidi came out. I'll ask her tomorrow. Okay,
I think they're gonna catch each other up.
okay, yeah. Usually I know if she goes somewhere, but, yeah, I'm not aware. Okay, because I don't know that we have a monitor or anything. I haven't been receiving any monitoring reports. Or was that that wasn't an RDA, so I should definitely be, it was an RDA? Oh, okay, then we wouldn't be getting monitoring reports. We'll talk tomorrow. Yep.
Next one is 242-808 Johnson Street, no file number.
So this is, Mr. Christensen is here to present the project, but it is basically a replacement septic system. You have, thank you. I just realized we didn't get those from,
I just have a question, Phil. I talked to Jen today, and she said about the Board of Health. The Board of Health didn't approve where you want to put it?
No, it's not approved yet.
not approved yet.
Right.
So you
I'm
might,
asking them for a variance and have not yet scheduled a hearing for that.
so you might have to move it.
So you're not on their agenda?
No.
And you're improperly before us.
No, I applied.
Oh, you
It's
applied?
applied for. I applied for it.
Oh, okay. I thought you were just saying you hadn't yet
No,
scheduled.
they have a review process where Mill River Consulting reviews the plans. They send back comments, we respond to the comments. Just have not been before the board yet.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll just
So,
keep it short and sweet then.
Sure. Yeah, it's just a septic repair. The soils in this area are a lot better than the soils outside the 100 feet. Also, if we tried to move the system outside the 100 feet, which is Heidi requested if we could, I gave her a write-up as to problems why we couldn't. There's less space available up there. When you go on the site and you see the vegetation, where the system is, you'll see oak trees and pine trees. As you move towards Johnson Street and also on that plan upwards, so it'd be north and west, you get into a lot more ash trees, which is indicative of fairly poor soils. So, and additionally, the piping for the existing septic system is out the back of the house. And if we were to move the system outside the 100 feet, we'd have to put a pump in for the system. You put a pump in, you're always asking for trouble. And pump systems tend to fail more frequently than do gravity-fed systems.
Okay.
And it complies with Title V.
Joe?
I don't see anything particularly bothersome about what they're proposing, presuming, of course, that Heidi and Jen are satisfied with the reasoning behind not putting it outside the 100, because in two-dimension, it looks perfectly capable of being somewhere else. But if you,
My only concern is he hasn't done soil testing anywhere but inside the 100, so,
Well, when you do soil testing on a site, what you do is you go out there and from experience, look at where you think the soils are going to be good. If I see ash trees, I don't test because you're going to have high groundwater and tight soils. Where this is tested is oak trees and pine trees.
Yeah.
And it's also, it's a repair, so you're looking at where is the present plumbing for the house. And that's an important consideration, so you don't have to pump to the system. So,
I think historically, the whole frontage along Johnson Street, that plateau, that's all filled maiden land
is it?
on top of junk. And so as you get more to the back, as you see the grade starting to take on, some real topography, that's the original profile that you're looking at. If you take that slope and you take it across Johnson Street and just up the hill, you can see where it is. And as you get to the hill, it's all clay pit hill, and material that's quarried out of it, that's what came into here. Whereas I'm told in the history of town, that was probably 80, 100 years ago or more. So I'm going to assume that the Board of Health's going to do their job and ask those same sorts of questions. So our presumption is this is what they're proposing. If Board of Health takes exceptions to it, they come back to us. So I think the proposal looks fine otherwise.
All set, sir.
Are there any waivers requested?
only from the Board of Health for the septic system within 100 feet.
Thanks.
We have to continue, we have no file number anyways.
No DEP number.
So we have to continue to the next meeting?
Yeah, no DEP number, right?
You have no DEP number.
So,
Yes, so
but
that's
if we do get a DEP number, you want me to draft something in anticipation that, when's your meeting with the Board of Health, Phil?
They haven't scheduled it yet, so I
Okay.
don't know.
So we're going to continue. We could theoretically close next meeting if Board of Health's business is concluded, right?
Or I could talk to them and get their opinion on if we approve it. Generally, if we're going to approve it, they're going to approve it. Unless there's some design issue, in which case they would. But if Mill River has done their review and they're basically just waiting to be before the board,
So-
Why did this?
So the waiver of the 100 feet isn't, but that's a waiver of the Board of Health to their own regulations.
right, but generally, if we're okay, and there's been times when we've asked it to be, I forget, somewhere off of Summer Street there, between Summer and Raleigh Tavern, we did a little bit of, I think you had asked them to get it out of the 100 because it was clear they could. There wasn't this kind of, pushback about grades and soils and those sorts of things. So they did move that one.
But ultimately, there's no harm if we close it.
If Board of Health somehow
Yeah,
made them move something, they would have to come back.
Just come back. It's not,
Right.
there's no harm either way.
Right.
Right, so we just want a motion to continue.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That's unanimous.
Thank you.
Thank you, Phil.
So Greg says he's on his way, and keep going.
Okay. Next one is
Keep going.
242, no file number.
Nope, that's the one, that's Greg.
Oh, that's Greg, too? Okay. Next one is 242-1692, 1210 Osgood Street.
So you did ask that Lisa Eggleston be in attendance to discuss stormwater. I don't know what process you want to follow. It's up to you. The applicant has submitted new information, which you have, response to Lisa's comments, new plans. Just today, we received a more detailed construction phasing, sequencing. Updated operation, long-term operation and maintenance plan. I think that about summarizes. There was some information on one of the bay filter.
One of our main concerns was the state-of-the-art stormwater plan. And that's why we asked for Lisa to come so she could explain it to us a little better.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Just again, for the record, Mike Howard from Epsilon Associates, and with me to my left is Joe Pesnola from Hancock Associates. As Jen correctly described it, there are really two big picture items and one administrative item. One was getting the DEP file number, which we have. The other two items, which we're prepared to talk through tonight, is again the stormwater management system and where that stands, and the status of Lisa's review. And Lisa, thank you for coming tonight. We do appreciate it. And the commission also asked for additional detail in the construction sequencing plan, which Joe and his office worked on between last hearing and leading up to tonight's hearing. So we're prepared to talk through both of those items. Mr. Chairman, we'll follow your lead as to which item you want to go through first, stormwater or the sequencing. It's really at your discretion.
Okay. We start off with the stormwater, I think, right? And if Lisa could explain the system to us and how it works and how it doesn't work.
Can I sit here, or do you need me at a mic?
Whatever works.
Okay.
We do need you at a mic,
Pull the mic
Lisa.
out next to them if you want.
Go.
Just pull that mic over there.
Okay.
We can share.
Mike and I will share. Mike is the reason I'm here.
So actually, Lisa, before you dive into the stormwater, I did preface it to the professionals representing the applicant at the last meeting, and I know you're very cognizant of this to do as well. I mean, oftentimes we compare pre and post when it comes to stormwater, and it often overlooked, not you by you ever, is that sometimes during the construction process, that's your worst condition. That's when you can have your peak flows unattenuated, your systems aren't in place and operable, and given what I see to be a pretty large degree of disturbed area, if not all of it disturbed area, to me, there's a great vulnerability during construction of having some sort of a stormwater management issue from a water quality perspective as well as a peak attenuation perspective. So that's the reasoning behind my asking for construction sequencing, which we just received today, and I haven't even had a chance to read anything except the title sheet, so I apologize for that. So I think when we're looking to you for stormwater discussion, we're not only looking for final design, how does this project work when it's fully built out and working, what do you think, maybe you have already looked at, what some of the pitfalls are as this project is brought online during month after month of construction.
Okay. So for the record, I'm Lisa Eggleston of Eggleston Environmental, the environmental engineer that is working for the Planning Board and the Conservation Commission doing peer review of the stormwater design. So you're asking me to explain the drainage design? I guess that's,
No.
No.
Okay.
No, we're asking, there's been a lot of back and forth.
Right.
Between the consultant and the wetland scientist and yourself, and,
Mm-hmm.
as you wiggle into the answer, there's some issues that are still open perhaps, and those that have been closed out. I guess we're really asking you to focus on those areas where there's either still some question or just outright haven't been satisfied yet.
Okay.
And let us hear about that.
yes. Okay, well, there should be in the record a series of review letters from me, as you're aware. You know, I think there have been several iterations in the design, and we've had a couple of meetings and so forth. And as the design has evolved, you know, I would say that it is, at this point, for the most part, compliant with the 10 stormwater standards, that the DEP stormwater standards. With the exception of a couple of minor things, and I don't even know if that's compliance issues, but details on the design plans. I did review the last set of design plans, what was the date on those? 11/28, 29? And there were just a couple of design details, you know, on the outlet structures and so forth, where comments just didn't get addressed. So those are relatively minor comments that I think are easily addressed. So at this point, I would say that the design concerns that I had have been addressed. You have subsurface structures throughout. They are meeting the recharge standard. They're mitigating peak runoff rates. They are not mitigating peak runoff volume. As you are aware, I mean, your regulations basically say that they have to look at volume, and they have done that. And I did raise some questions at one point about whether, because there is a shifting of flow from one of the wetlands to the other. Jen and I had some discussion about it, and I know that Joe has been out and looked at the area and so forth, and determined that none of those are isolated wetlands, which is when, you know, I would be most concerned about that in terms of impacting the hydrology of the wetland systems. And they are all connected, and that the excess water, where there's a volume increase, is not going to be constrained, so it's not going to cause flooding off of the site. So that has been addressed. The water quality issues, treatment, they are meeting the 80% TSS requirement with infiltration for pavement from the residential portion of the property and the roof areas. That's also the recharge. And then the commercial paved areas are being treated. Those areas are going into these closed detention systems, large pipe detention systems, attenuating the flow, and then through proprietary filters, the bay filter units is what's being proposed. And there were a number of back and forths just to get that design so that the flow was actually, the water quality volume was actually being directed through those filters and had no way to bypass that. So there were a few iterations with that. So now I believe that has been resolved, that the design is such that all of the water quality volume will be directed through the filters unless those back up. If they are not maintained, then it will back up and it will bypass. And so that is the treatment. The site, that portion of the site does constitute a LUPL, land use with higher potential pollutant loads for pollutant loading of oil and grease. The DEP handbook says that for sites with oil and grease, you need to provide filtering, bioretention, sand filters, or an equivalent. So I asked for documentation that this filter is an equivalent. And that's where I believe you have in this submittal a letter from the manufacturers. This one I actually have a little bit of a hard time with. I think actually the fact that they are putting in this, this fabric that they have. And Joe, do you know, is that a standard in there, all of their filters, or is that an add-on to this one?
No, standard.
Okay, all right. I actually did a little bit of research because I'm looking at these filters elsewhere as well, not this particular brand, but, and although, I'm trying to find that letter. Thank you. The ADS letter basically says Bay filter cartridges are the most thoroughly tested filter cartridges on the market. Washington and Maryland are two of the most stringent, blah, blah, blah. What's interesting is when I went into all those tests that are done, and they're right, they are one of the more tested, and they are very effective, by the way. And they're particularly effective, or they are also effective at removing phosphorus. But none of the tests address oil and grease. So I could not find documentation that these are effective at removing, specifically treating oil and grease. Intuitively, they should be. They are a media filter, where the water is forced through the filter unit. And, you know, this talks about this oleophilic fabric, which is basically something that the oil and grease would sorb to, and it will also sorb to the media within the filter. You know, so I'm reasonably confident that it will, but it is interesting that of all the parameters and all of the testing that has been done, nobody has documented that these are effective at removing oil and grease. So I guess I throw that out there to you as still a question mark, although I think that of the proprietary treatment alternatives, this one is probably, you know, short of going to a subsurface sand filter, which obviously is going to meet the requirement because that's what the DEP handbook calls for, and sand filters are known to be effective in treating oil and grease. I think this is the best option other than that. So that's just for your information. And then I think that's all of it in terms of the standards. The last thing was the O&M plan, and there are still a couple of components missing from that, the checklist and the figure, which I know, you know, you folks also, that's a standard requirement, and that this is going to be a standalone document, and that there should be a simplified figure that shows where all of these BMPs are going to be maintained. The other thing is that at this point, it is the responsibility for maintenance is apparently joint. It's listed as both. There's two entities, the commercial side and the residential side. So I'm not a lawyer. I don't know how that works in terms of who you hold responsible if there is a problem. So I don't know whether there's easements that are needed and so forth, but it's something to consider. What I will say about this particular system is it's going to need regular maintenance in order to function properly. And it should be scheduled maintenance, and there should be a reporting structure and so forth, because the type of treatment that you've got is below ground, and it will be very effective if these units are maintained, but if they're not maintained, it's going to be bypassed, and nobody's going to know the difference. And so you'll be discharging untreated. It's not going to back up and flood out the parking lot. There's no red flags that pop out. So it will need to be maintained. It's also going to be very costly to maintain. Relatively speaking, it is a costly, these are subsurface structures, they require confined spaced entry, and they are proprietary media. So every couple of years they're going to need to swap it out, particularly, that's something I think you should absolutely require because of the fabric lining is going to need to be swapped out. So it's going to be important to establish a schedule and then just require the routine reporting. And I think we have seen a couple of other projects where that has been the case. I know that there are other filters in town.
I have a question on the maintenance of these devices. I'm sure the manufacturer has a recommended time when they should be done. Are you comfortable, you've reviewed these, are you comfortable with the timetable that they have issuing? Or do you feel that they should be done more often than not?
That's a good question. I'm looking for, what I can't remember is whether the New Jersey CAT, when they do their certifications of these structures, they typically include a maintenance requirement, and a required recommended maintenance schedule, which sometimes goes above and beyond that of the manufacturer. And I believe I checked that, but I'm looking for that in here, because I thought I brought it. Yeah, no, you have, I have the manufacturer's recommendation, and I think it's, is it calling for, I know you have, is it?
Twice a year.
Twice a year, inspecting, right. And, but then is there a minimum requirement for replacing the cartridges?
There's none.
Okay. That might be something that should be put in there, because these don't get just hosed down, do they? They're not like the jellyfish where you take them out and wash them down.
No.
Okay. So, yeah, that's something that probably, there should be a minimum frequency at which the cartridges are swapped out. And I think particularly given that you know, it may be refreshing the cartridge, that, I mean, that's going to be the only way that you refresh the oil and grease removal potential. It's not going to wash out. It's not, other than that, they're basically pulling them out and then they vector out the chamber, you know, which is going to remove your sediment, and they're going to be very effective at that as well.
So we don't know what the life expectancy is of the netting?
No. Joe, what did you base the estimate on in terms of frequency of replacement?
We averaged it just over a little longer period. There are 5 units. One unit has 3 cartridges, one unit has 2, and the balance have 1. I'm sorry, there's 4 bay filters. 3 cartridges, 2 cartridges, and 2 with 1. So that makes 7. I believe the cartridge replacements are $350. And we're being told it's 5 years is the general. But I didn't do a, you know, total spreadsheet breakdown cost estimation. We just talked to maintenance people and got an estimation based on the scope of the system, the entire system. One of the things we have done is we've had interaction with one of the premier stormwater maintenance companies in the region. What we've found is, while we do a good job here in Massachusetts at defining maintenance, I think communities as a whole have had trouble in enforcement of maintenance. And this company, Stormwater Compliance, is based out of Maine. They have presence here, but their main, their larger bite of the market in stormwater maintenance is in Maine, because Maine, by and large, does what at least they feel is a better job at enforcement of maintenance. So there's a bigger market up there. Notwithstanding, they are very good at what they do. They understand these systems. They have the equipment, the vac trucks. They have stick cameras, and they're all confined space certified. They just understand the complexities of these larger complex systems. And I did ask them just to put a letter together to corroborate that we have talked to them and that we intend to engage them for the maintenance program. One of the things that they suggested that mirrors the Maine's approach is to require that a 5-year maintenance contract be presented to the commission, and then at the terminus of that, or when we get to the close to the point of that maintenance contract writing up, we've got to prove it again. We've got to present another 5-year maintenance contract. So if you have a contract that says it's executed, the site owner is paying for 5 years worth of maintenance. If they pay, then they will come and do the maintenance. And it's a different approach than doing it. Than just doing annual logs, annual reports. We could obviously do that as well. They just offer it as maybe an additional belt suspenders approach to providing the board with some comfort. This letter from Stormwater Maintenance is just very short, basically saying that they've looked at the system, they understand the system, they understand the concerns with the sediment loading, and that they believe that if properly, as Lisa said, if properly maintained, the systems will function and do a good job. So.
Well, having that would eliminate the problem you said about having retail and residential, because the contract would probably cover both, the whole site, correct?
Right, that may be, I mean, I think that's a great suggestion to do that. Yeah, I think the only issue with straightening out that responsibility is that, if something is not happening, you need to be able to enforce it. I think the maintenance contract is, similar to having a surety bond or something. I mean, it ensures that it's being paid for, but you also need an entity that you can go after to hold responsible. And I don't know if it's that you hold them both responsible. That may be the answer.
So we've got so we have a notice of intent from a single entity now to two separate entities, co-applicants.
Co-applicants.
So
So any decision we render is going to be to the applicant, whether it's
Correct.
to them. So
Right.
it's going to be binding upon those entities.
Correct.
Single order conditions
Correct.
that both are subject to.
I think the points that Lisa's raising, and the good ones, I think it's more contractual. The order of conditions that we're asking for the commission applies to both parties. And structuring the filing that way, I think it's reasonable to assume the commission would hold both parties responsible on the regulations.
That's where I was going to go. So I think the responsibility thing is pretty clean. The question then becomes, so what is it we're asking them to do? And I think we've got the applicant's professional who's consulted with another vendor, if you will, who's competent in the business, and they've got an idea of what it takes. And if we agree with that, then that becomes what needs to be done, not necessarily handing stormwater compliance a multi-year contract, but simply the things that they're looking to propose to do that we think are adequate. That's what we require. We then require periodic reporting and certification to it, and some surety that it's done on a regular basis. Maybe the long-term contract is partly getting us there. Hearing things like these bay filters aren't tested for, petroleum products, oil and gas. We think they're going to work. So what are they looking at? Is it a visual inspection? Are they simply replacing them periodically, every 6 months? whether they need it or not? I mean, what are we asking them to look at?
Well, I think that's actually a valid question, because I'm seeing in this letter that Joe submitted from Stormwater Compliance that they're talking about maintaining for sediment loading. And sediment loading certainly is, a concern, but the point with this particular, LUPL designation is that it also is going to generate higher loads of oil and grease. So, I think that would need to be part of, that should be specifically called out in the O&M plan, that they are maintaining for that if there are indications that, and maybe this is a discussion that needs to be held, with the filter company in terms of what is the life expectancy, that it's effective at removing the oil and grease. And then you set up a schedule to replace the filters. It's not something that's going to be rinsed out. It's not something that's going to be cleaned out in that annual maintenance or semi-annual maintenance and so forth. That oil and grease is not, it's going to be sorbed to the actual media. So unless they're refreshing the media, unless they're replacing those cartridges, that aspect of it is not going to be.
So that took me to the middle of the road, which is, so what is it are they inspecting, and what constitutes the need for replacement or the need for additional service?
Right.
And then lastly, that next tier is, and the contractor, whether it's multi-year or whatever it is, what level of competence do we even speak? There's no certification. There's no licensed operator of these systems, So is it, I mean, do we get a landscaper? Is it the janitorial staff? Who
No,
does
I mean,
these?
the fact that it's confined
These
space
guys are good.
entry, requires a certain level of competence, because that's a certification. And so people, the landscapers aren't going to be confined space entry, qualified. So, I think that narrows it, and it is a specialty field. And you have the outfits such as this that have the vacuum trucks and so forth. So, I don't think it's rocket science replacing these. I don't think that, I think that there are prescribed thresholds for when they need, replacement and so forth. We just have to make sure that the right language is in there that says, okay, if it hits this, you replace it.
And this is the
Or you
last-
just set a minimum, you replace them at a minimum once a year, once every 2 years, or whatever, seems to be.
Which I'm fine with, but
Right.
what if the manufacturer says, every 6 months?
Well, I mean, I think that's something that still remains to be determined, is, what is the life, that we can reasonably expect them to be effective at removing that.
Okay.
Well, just a couple of points that I think need to be made here with regards to the whole subject matter. When we start to talk about effectiveness, we only have one measure of pollutant removal that is mandated in the state of Massachusetts, and that's total suspended solids. We understand that in a LUPL like this, we need certain types of treatment devices, treatment BMPs that address oil and gas. But we don't have any parameters for which, any numbers, any quantifiable numbers that say it needs to treat this much or remove that much. So we just need to be careful with respect to that. The system is designed such that you can backwash them. So that the idea is that you'd put a hose on the outlet side with the back truck there and send water back through it. So there is some information that the company has with regards to when the life expectancy can be extended and when it's done.
All in the context of solids removal,
No, because its primary function's not solids removal. Its primary function, we have to understand this, that if we only worried about solids removal, we wouldn't be using this device. It is because we're a LUPL and because we have no other treatment chain within this these particular closed pipe systems, that we can't use a particle separator, a hydrodynamic, because we can only use the hydrodynamics for pre-treatment. So if we only have one BMP, then it can't be pre-treatment. Pre-treatment isn't your soul. It's pre to something else. So that's why we moved in the direction of the filter cartridge, because we already had, the designs laid out, and we had the closed pipe systems. We originally had hydrodynamic separators on these. Lisa pointed out the point within the handbook with regards to the pretreatment. So we went to this. So it is more than we need, because it will hit phosphorus and it will hit other zinc and other constituents that are important, but we're not required to do it. I think the best way to do it is keep it simple. If the manufacturer says the life expectancy is between 5 and 10 years, we'll commit to take the low number of that side and put it in your conditions, that we remove those. So then every 5-year mark, the report better say that all 7 cartridges were removed and replaced. And then we're not mincing words about, well, the inspector looked at the cartridge and it looked like, we're just saying, when we hit the 5 years, we'll do it. And I think we can argue till the cows come home about, during that 5-year period, the effectiveness of all these other constituents and the removals of them. But if we have no parameters, we really can't say whether it's gotten to a point that it's unacceptable.
There's no discharge effluent parameter, what's allowable, what's it exceeds?
For oil and grease?
Yeah.
No.
Or
And
phosphorus
actually,
or zinc or...
One thing that does occur to me, though, is that all of this flow is going through deep sump catch basins as well, footed deep sump catch basins. Yeah, so, and that's, we shouldn't lose sight of that, because that's the first, Right. And, and that's going to trap a lot of the oil and grease, too, because it's got that hooded outlet. So, I would agree that probably these two are going to be... Right, you are. Yeah, and the whole, the whole Luppel designation is somewhat
And
random.
it's also a, it's a retail center.
Mm-hmm.
So what I've found in retail centers is you have a high motivation to keep them clean. And in good presentable form, because you're trying to bring customers there to those retail establishments. So you're trying to present a certain atmosphere, and therefore you best keep your parking lot swept and so forth and so on. So yes, first line of defense is keeping your parking lot. Second line of defense is the deep sump hooded catch basins. With a good maintenance program, that means those are getting vacked out, which means all the oil and grease is getting out, all the sediment's coming out on a regular basis. So your sediment load is lower to this next system. Yes.
The other thing that I will add is these, and I do agree with that. I think that probably between those two, you're going to get very good treatment for the oil and grease. The other thing that we did have some discussion back and forth about was the fact that these are downgradient of the ADS closed pipe system. That pipe, because it's attenuating the flow. No, the filters are downgradient.
On the discharge side?
Yes. So, because these were initially, it was just the closed pipe, and I think you had the storm scepters or whatever upgradient of that. But in any case, so these filters are on the downgradient side. Well, that flow is going to come into these big pipe systems, and they're big plastic pipes. A lot of the oil and grease is going to just stick to the sides of the pipes too. But one of the concerns that I had was that because that's going to be kind of a stilling basin, if you will, the water is going to go through the filter very slowly, relatively speaking. So there's going to be some settling in that ADS pipe system. So one of the things that I did ask Joe to do was add in a means of, and, periodically cleaning out those pipes. It's not going to get carried over, but as you fill it up, then, you're losing your storage capacity and your water quality volume and all that. So that has also been added in.
We have full manholes at all the inlets, and then at Lisa's request, we added inspection ports for another place to monitor the system and another place to clean sediment out. And in talking to stormwater compliance, the way that they inspect their systems is with these stick cameras. It's a stick camera with a live feed, bright light. They can go down in inspection ports, and they can monitor the sediment loading. So on their 2 times out a year, they see that. They understand the importance of not having that sediment take up storage space or impact the functionality of the bay filters. So they will get the sediment out of those systems.
And I believe the isolator row is going to be maintained basically in the same manner. So, this could be a one-stop, do all of those things, put them on the same cycle, and then you get, I find that if things are on a routine cycle as opposed to at sediment thresholds, they're going to be budgeted for, it's going to be scheduled, and it's more likely to happen.
In your O&M plan, I guess this is directed at Mike Goodgo. In your O&M plan on page 6, you're talking about the bay filter treatment units. The bottom paragraph says that bay filter maintenance must be performed by a Bay Saver Technologies certified maintenance contractor. Is stormwater compliance from Yarmouth, Maine, certified by Bay Filter Systems?
They are.
They are. Okay, that's good. Is there an alternative to the Bay Filter Systems that does trap oil and grease, even though, as you point out, you may not necessarily be required to do so?
Well, it does. It does trap oil and grease, but are there other systems that have been widely tested for oil and gas removal? I would say it's what Lisa had said.
What I heard was sand filter was the alternative.
Right,
Yeah.
sand filter.
So you prefer the bay filter over the sand?
Well, with the sand filters, if they have to be deconstructed to reconstitute them, and it's a lot more difficult to fix a sand filter than it is to pull a cartridge and put a new cartridge in. So.
I hear you. I just would hope the cartridge works. I understand the maintenance of the cartridge is preferred, provided that it works.
Yeah.
This site, as we talked about last week, this site is, we feel it's pretty much a maxed out site. And when you look at the overall grading plan and the number of parking spaces and the pavement, it really is a maxed out site. Is there any plan, when this site is completed, will any part of this be turned over to the town and as a public way and maintained by the town, or will this forever be maintained by an association?
No, this will be forever maintained by the two parties. And there will be a subdivision, and the subdivision is merely for financial and ownership reasons. It has nothing to do with trying to parse out the systems or the parking lots. The subdivision line is going to go right down the middle of the parking lot between the two.
Yeah.
So there's going to be cross easements on everything. There's going to be agreements between the two parties for not only stormwater maintenance, but maintenance of all the other utilities, for sharing of parking. All of many aspects of the project have to do with this mixed-use idea that kind of is complicated because you've got a residential developer that wants to do a residential project and a commercial developer who wants to do commercial, and when you talk about mixed use, it's hard to put one guy in there that's going to own both.
No, I understand that,
Yeah.
but so it would be comparable to like a condo association that does does the maintenance, because otherwise, it's either that or it's a public way.
Yes.
At some point, you'd be asking the town to accept it as public.
Absolutely not. It is 100%
So there'll be an association
private.
formed on both sides, and those associations will have joint responsibilities for the O&M plan.
Absolutely.
And my last question, and I guess this is probably either of you or of Jen, when they have, in their O&M plan, when they have somebody like stormwater compliance doing the work, and I don't have any reason to not feel that they would do anything but a great job, is there anybody on our side of the ball that monitors the inspections? Like, where you do wetland science work for us, do we have anybody in the town that's qualified to be the integrity checker on our side? And so essentially, if the answer is no, and I'm suspecting it is,
We're just taking it in.
who looks out for us? So we're receiving reports, and like I said, I'm not trying to impugn anybody, I'm just simply, because I have trust issues when it comes to this stuff, who's looking out for us?
Yeah, the past 7 years of the extension of the first 5-year permit, the NIPD's, all the cities and towns were wrestling with, the how do we do this question. So this past summer, in July, they, EPA has issued that permit, not draft permit, they issued the permit. And people have to have it, and towns have to have their notices of intent in to EPA this coming late spring. And things like that are going to become crystal clear to all towns of what it is that you're going to do, because it's going to obligate us in the future on all of these systems to be able to be monitoring and determining and documenting that they're being cared for and maintained.
So that's where I'm going, because we require wetland monitors on projects that have far less impacts than what this could potentially have. And why aren't we in the business of looking for and hiring a monitor that works for us, that checks the work of stormwater compliance or whoever? Why aren't we in that? If we have wetland monitors checking, erosion controls and things like that, this could potentially have far more impact if anything went wrong. Where is that? Can you help me out with that, Lisa?
Yeah, no, I was just joking, maybe there's a new career for me.
Well-
No, but it's certainly
it's
not
not a joke.
something
Maybe-
Stand in line.
Maybe there is. Don't, keep your boots handy, because
Thank you.
you don't want to do it, huh?
It's not something that I see, very often. I hear absolutely what you're saying, but it is not something that is typically done. It's, I think that, and generally, the towns don't have the capability to do
Well,
it.
I know we don't. I know we don't.
I think you have an advantage with a private developer because you can require them to do it.
I mean, we know
And-
during the construction, we understand who's going to be looking out. We get the team
Right.
that's here, but then it's done.
Right.
It's paved, the papers are passed, and the keys are handed over, and then all of a sudden, it's like, oh, man, now what? Now it's just another big giant mall.
But to
that's
Joe's
not getting-
point, unlike what we've done in the past, is we might consider an inspection schedule of certain items stated, with a frequency stated by a competent vendor, documented and approved, not approved, but documented and on record with our town, and a documented contract for the carry out of those services for some period of time, maybe 5 years.
Well, I think.
That lays it out, I think, as best we can under the current structure.
Well, we need to be doing that then. We need to be getting ahead of this thing. We need to be doing that now.
So one suggestion, and we've done this for some other towns where we've received orders of conditions involving, long-term maintenance and monitoring of stormwater management systems. Building upon Joe's suggestion, and I think this is something that would be palatable to our client, is in addition to submitting the reports to the commission, whatever schedule, you condition in your order, is as an additional special condition, require the proponent to appear annually before the commission at a public meeting and just present what's happened over that year and walk you through what it was, allows you to ask questions, and then you'll get some confidence that the system's working as we're describing here today. So it's another way of holding us, our client, the future, whoever out there, accountable, because they're appearing before you and they're giving you the information and they're allowing you to ask questions, as opposed to just getting reports in the mail every couple months. So
I
It's a
think that's what
suggestion.
I'm asking for, is eyes on the project. Just like as if you were monitoring as a wetland monitor.
Yeah, and right, and I agree with you. I think what I'm suggesting is, and however the condition is worded between your agent and the commission, is obviously if said person has to appear before the commission annually, leading up to that annual public meeting, they should have the photo documentation, their field notes, whatever they need to do to justify the commission that on these dates, we did this, and here's the information to present. I think that's a workable condition that would protect your concerns and would hold the proponent accountable for presenting the information to the commission.
Is that something we can condition?
Certainly. I know
Tracking it internally, how do you just put it on a calendar?
that would become the hard part, yeah. We would leave that up to probably just scheduling annually,
I mean,
just putting
the
a date on the
alternative is
calendar.
if you can't track it, the alternative is we find somebody that can and they get hired as a monitor.
Well, I think this,
mean-
doing it this way is very, very helpful.
But they're working for the,
So it has been working well. Butcher
Yeah, I know,
Boy's
but they're
been
not
doing
gonna
it.
put that-
We are
yeah.
getting their reports. You know, the problem is it's consistency of staff. So, you know, I've been here. I know the people who are supposed to be submitting and reporting, but you have probably a couple decades worth of stuff that are supposed to be submitting reports that don't. And it would require going back through all of those
That's exactly
orders
my
and
point.
and finding out. So as long as it's something that's on a calendar, scheduled annually, and known to be done, then it's going to work as soon as it's...
Let's start by
fall.
conditioning it and
See how it
attempt,
goes.
attempt to get it done, because otherwise, I mean, no disrespect to anybody, but you could file anything. If there's no fact checker, you could write fairy tales. I'm not saying these guys would. I'm not criticizing anybody in the room. I'm simply saying it has the potential to have a barrel of reports that mean nothing. I'm always looking for integrity checks, that's all. That's just, and I'm done. I'm good. Thanks.
I think the other thing you can do in this particular case, because the filter company has, put in this language about a certified,
Yeah.
is include that in your conditions too. And I think that the idea of a maintenance contract makes a lot of sense, because then, and if it's a 5-year thing, then it's it will come up for renewal, and then they need to bring that back to you.
Well, that's something we're gonna have to work at,
That's-
make sure we get it right, the O&M plan.
Yeah.
And then we transfer it to these guys, and they hire somebody like these two.
Yeah, I mean,
And they would have what we're requiring, so that when they file a report or do the maintenance, it would be on there. And regardless, they're working for them, but their name's on the paper, saying that we did this and we did that per your O&M plan.
I like it, and I think that that's an excellent step. I'm always looking to have somebody that actually,
Because like Lisa says, there's nobody out there that,
well, it's
Like
a
a
new
third
career,
party
there
review.
could be a new career field opening for somebody. Right.
If I were
I'll send
20,
Mr.
I'd look
Chairman.
into it.
and that's why we asked the applicant to have you come tonight, because just to kind of like give us a feel for this storm system.
Well, I think, stepping back from this, and obviously this project has progressed to a level where I think it is just about a wrap. But just stepping back from that and the whole issue of maintenance, I think this is, I'll just get on my little soapbox here and say this is one of the reasons why LID, where you can incorporate these, naturalized systems and so forth, they're also easier to maintain, and they're on the surface, and they're visible. And so when something isn't getting maintained, it's more visible. That's not to say that every surface structure gets maintained. Jen and I have been out to some that, are decades old and long forgotten. But in any case, that's kind of my plug for, I have particular concern when things go below ground and they're expensive to maintain, because I think that's where, there's a disincentive there. So I think it's important to put in the requirements.
Thank you. Jack?
I'm just going to, I apologize for coming in part of the way through the discussion, but I heard some things that, make me believe it's a pretty, this is one of our more tenuous stormwater management systems in town. I think there's 14 subsurface systems underneath the pavement, and it's to support a very dense development plan. That's fine. Our goal is to make sure it works, though, in terms of stormwater management. And, but what I've heard is that, the discussion of the filters, the cartridges versus the sand filters. We're not going with one that is certified as an oil, gas attenuator. Okay, it might do it, but it might not. We know the sand filter does. That's recommended by DEP. Maybe not a big deal, but, that's one point against, in my view. Secondly, there seemed to be some confusion as to how frequently the cartridges needed to be changed or backwashed or serviced. We didn't know. 5 years, 3 years, 6 months. It wasn't understood. Doesn't give me a very comfortable feeling that what's proposed is going to work. Layer on top of that a comment that I heard in the discussion that if it does fail, there's no apparent evidence that the water just goes out at poor quality. So if it does fail, nobody knows. Perhaps for a very long time, or perhaps when a silt plume is, out there 30 feet long, which is kind of excessive. You've got a high maintenance system being subsurface. There is a disincentive because of the cost. It was hundreds of dollars each cartridge, and there were several cartridges per each one of these 14 subsurface systems. And you've got 2 tenants with shared easements that have to abide by an agreement that seems to me that we're setting it up for arguments and conflicts and lack of maintenance. And I do like the suggestions that we've had, with the recent discussions with Al and Joe, and was suggested by Joe Pesnola, that we somehow monitor it. But this looks like one of those kind of systems that if we are going to hang our hat on that plan, it's got to be very well crafted and very well thought out, and ideally, and I don't know if this is possible, but ideally has a measure, a concrete, discrete measure of quality that goes out of this system, whether it's TSS, turbidity. I don't know what you would use. I'm not a civil engineer, but a direct measurement of water quality where it's not so apparent that there might be a failure.
The ceiling's leaking.
Oh,
Moving.
I thought I was going way off track.
Oh, we were talking
was just
earlier, Jack, about
Yeah, I know. I saw it over
We'll have to
there.
order you an umbrella.
It's okay. Stormwater.
Yeah, no, that just sort of sums it up. I don't know how we get to a plan that effectively, makes sure that this thing
No more notes.
100% of the time discharges acceptable quality stormwater. But let's, if it can be done, let's find a way. If it can't be done, it's hard for me to accept it, the design.
There's a couple points that I think need to be made here. Again, with regards to the effectiveness of the treatment, we are required to provide, when we're a LUPL, we're to provide oil and gas devices that will treat oil and gas. But again, there's no parameter on that. There's not the 80% TSS removal. So we've done that, both with our hoods in our catch basins, which treat oil and gas quite effectively, and in every other instance that you're not a LUPL, that is the only primary, the first line of defense to the oil and gas. We've provided the second. So we can't measure something that there are no parameters for treatment of. Even where we do have parameters, the 80% TSS removal is just that. It's removal of TSS. We have to first define how much TSS we have in the stream, influent, to then be able to measure our output to verify that we've gotten the 80%. And that just hasn't been done since 1996 when the original requirement was implemented, because from that point on, we've all been going under the auspices of each BMP is granted a number. Catch basins are credit. Catch basins are 25%, and this is 70%, and this is 84%. And for us to be punished for the failure of assigning that number is difficult to say. I think what we have to do is we got to bring it back down. This is a large, complex system, but it is a system that is, by and large, going to output a very high quality water, relatively speaking to the comparisons of systems that haven't been designed with this much thought and this much peer review and this much interaction of not only LISA but the manufacturers of the filters and the manufacturers of the other BMPs that were done and people like stormwater compliance. It's a lot of thought here. There's going to be some more thought and some more definitive action on what will be, what I understand to be, the most comprehensive set of maintenance conditions that this commission has ever put forth. And I think it is a pathway to the future of how we get these systems to be maintained, how we get the enforcement done, or the insurance that these systems are maintained. But at the end of the day, this is a good system. It's a proper system. It fully meets not only the standards, the 10 standards, but in some respects exceeds those, and goes a long way to provide even more in the quantity of volume that we're putting in the systems.
So if I get this right, there's a well thought out system. I'm not, discarding that. There's a lot of BMPs here, which basically stormwater is. It's always a combination of BMPs to really, do what it takes. It all hinges on maintenance. It seems to hinge. This system seems to hinge more on maintenance than many of the others that we see before us.
If I could just clarify on a couple of things there. One is, I absolutely agree with Joe that the monitoring is not the route to go. You can't test the 80%, or even if there were a criterion for oil and gas removal, I would steer you away from doing that. And this is somebody who put herself through grad school doing stormwater monitoring. It is such a hit or miss. There's just too many variables at play. But the best, and the stormwater handbook does not require you to remove 80% of the TSS. It requires you to implement BMPs that, on average, do that. It's an inexact science, right? And to maintain them. And I think that this design is doing that. It is implementing BMPs that will meet that requirement. They will provide the oil and grease and so forth. The only BMPs that are what I would term high maintenance and less foolproof are the filters that are treating the runoff from the commercial area. All of the rest of the system, I mean, you've got the isolator rows, which is the pre-treatment. It's actually a very high level of pre-treatment. And then going into infiltration. And, the infiltration That you will know if it stops infiltrating. So, that's a very reliable form of treatment, and it's very similar to what you would get in a natural system if you did it on the surface. It's really just that commercial parking lot runoff that goes through these filters. The filters do provide an excellent level of treatment. I have absolutely no doubt about that. It's better than what you would get in a lot of other systems. So, I think that the important thing is just making sure that they get maintained.
Well, I think if we can agree to a period of time that those filters need to be replaced, I think there'll be a mechanism in place for reporting and contractual obligations to replace them, then we just do it. So it's not left to chance or to somebody's field observation or interpretation of what they're seeing. And we'd be happy to abide by that. Whether it's, I don't think it's going to be 6 months. I'm thinking it's going to be 5 years, but it could be 3. And as I said, they're going to give us a range, and we'll abide by the lower number of the range.
Sitting there. And now I'm like, oh my God, are they ever developing it? I mean, it looks like an asphalt jungle when you look at it on the conceptual landscape plan. And it looks like you're not looking for any waivers, you're abiding by all the setbacks, but when I hear the term maxed out site, I hate to hear it, especially with land that has just been sitting there.
This is a town, not a city.
Yeah, an area that's just been sitting there undeveloped for so long. And this looks like something that sits, between 133 and 114. Like Eaglewood and where Bertucci's is, which was built decades ago.
Compared to the incinerator, the transfer station, and the factory?
Well, it's really far away. You don't really get to see that from the roadway.
That's also
But-
the adult entertainment district down there.
That's right.
So I understand that there are BMPs in place, and there are a lot of different mechanisms that are used to meet the requirements of the Wetland Protection Act and other stormwater guidelines. But I just hate to see this develop to the degree that it is without some green space there, without using some natural means to infiltrate water, without having less impervious surface. So, but otherwise, I don't have any other questions or thoughts. Doug?
Well, I guess it's gonna be determining how often those filters get replaced. So what's the manufacturer saying? They don't give you a number, do they?
I will, as I said, I didn't bring with me the certification from the New Jersey CAT, but they have done the verification and independent verification study, and they typically do recommend maintenance protocols, so I will investigate that and see what they're recommending in terms of the frequency of maintenance. But other than that, I do think that, these filter companies, they have a vested interest in these being successful. So, I think that their recommendations typically tend to be pretty, and they sell the products, so they're not going to tell you not to change them more frequently. It's kind of, so, that's how they make their money. It may be overly conservative, what they're recommending, but I think that that's.
Which is fine, and we're happy to commit to that. So,
Yeah.
Again, we use an awful long time, but historically, looking at what DEP has done with the whole certification of these various types of BMPs, the whole STEP program, the way they've rethought it, even DEP themselves don't know what the heck these things are and what to do with them.
No, and the STEP program is no longer funded.
Exactly. They just
Mass
did
STEP
away
is
with it.
no longer funded. So we are kind of at, that's why I went and looked at the various certifications, and these are all, great independent studies. This is a very well-researched technology. I just thought it was interesting, and I don't mean to belabor that point. I just thought it was interesting that the one parameter that they don't list is oil and grease.
Yeah, and we've bored people to death with watching at home, but I wanted to make clear that we're not putting all the credibility on some study perhaps funded by the manufacturer.
No,
That's
these are
exactly what
independent
DEP wants.
verification
That's exactly what
studies.
DEP expects, is that those studies be done by others, and that the state itself is done away with the certification program.
Well, the state doesn't have the resources to do the independent verification. They rely on other states that
Well,
are
they actually have the
doing.
resources, they just choose not to direct them.
Well,
Topic for another table.
yeah.
Just saying.
If we've beaten up on the O&M a little bit, enough, I mean, if you're ready to move on, there are a couple of other things that I did want to just touch on that I think the commission should be aware of. One is the discharge from the System 10, just that outfall, Jen, that you and I had talked about. Joe, this is the one that you guys, the apron.
The high wall?
No, it's not a high wall, it's just, I don't know if you have a plan that you can throw up there.
System 10?
Yeah, it's the one just on the left when you drive in.
Oh, the driveway coming in, okay.
Yeah, the first system. Yep, see where Joe's?
Yep.
We have
Yep.
Vanna White over here. The only, I had raised the issue because that was outletting, and this is driven by, this whole thing is very flat, the system. So they've, that pipe is got to be at that elevation. And so they have regraded that. I had just asked some questions because I think the last iteration, the pipe was coming out 2 feet below grade, and I just wanted to make sure that all the grading could be done outside of the 50-foot. And I think the only question is whether or not that really needs to be the full-length apron, or whether there may be a better way to do that, do it as a level spreader or something, spread it out a little bit more so that you keep it away from. I just didn't know whether that was something that you folks would want to take a look at. It's a fairly long.
Make it a different shape or
Yeah, I think you can get the velocity,
pool type?
yeah, or a plunge pool or something, if that's a concern in terms of the length of the apron.
So we did do the velocity check on all the discharge
Right.
points, and we didn't see, I think the flows there are small.
They
and
should be.
The velocities are small because of the volume attenuation that we're doing.
Yeah, so that apron is, that is designed in accordance with the standards, and, which means it's probably, pretty large. My only point there was those calculations don't take into account slope and all that. So, there are sometimes other ways than doing this one long riprap apron, and I didn't know whether, when you and I had the conversation, Jen, it was whether it was, there was concern about whether that could be graded out there. As it is now, it meets your requirements and it meets the standards.
Our 10-year storm velocity is 2.2 feet per second, and so, we think velocity is a problem when it gets up around 10.
Well, you get scour before that, but obviously that's when it's discharged from the pipe, so then it's going over the riprap. I just wanted to raise that, and then I don't know if you wanted to talk about the construction phasing, sequencing. I did receive the plan, and I only just read it this evening during your earlier hearing, so, I don't really have comments on that as yet, and
That's where I was gonna go, was I just got this afternoon, I didn't have to look straight, I paid attention to the rest of the meeting.
sorry.
I haven't even read it yet.
Well, would it help if I ran through it real quick?
I think we're getting on to, we have a lot of people still waiting for this evening. At least 3 more
Yeah,
applicants, so, it didn't meet the 7-day submission guidelines. I would recommend that you take it in and
Yeah. What I would suggest, I know the holiday seasons are right upon us, but like we did with another applicant where we were concerned about density and sequencing because of that density, maybe form a separate subcommittee and maybe talk about it, separately. We were prepared to come into a future meeting and have all the, have us report out that we're satisfied. Us, I'm looking at you and I again. Why do I do that?
Well, the main thing, I think you satisfied the commission pretty much on the stormwater.
Yeah.
So we're there. The only problem is that construction sequence and the compaction studies on the, when you got them 12 and 15-foot fills, and you got the stormwater tanks in there and drainage pipes and buildings. I just want to make sure that I don't think it's a big deal. It just concerns me to open up a 13-acre site and not really know what we're looking at.
yeah, I mean,
We
that's
talked
what-
about it
that's-
originally, to stop in the back and work our way out.
And that's why we put together the sequencing. And the heart of the sequencing is the fact that we're only talking about removal of vegetation and loam in a strip that will support the beginnings of the wall and the sediment basins and the diversion swales. So now you're limiting the potential impact. You're working in a very small area. You get that first 2 or 3 courses of block down on your large block gravity wall, and you build yourself a dam. Then, and only then, when you have your sed basins in, and we've sized those sed basins, and that information was sent last week, what we did in today's submission was just expand it in the form of a narrative, but it was on the plans with regards to all the sed basins being properly sized volumetrically, based on the contributing areas up gradient of them. So once we have that stripped down, and we have those sed basins and those diversion swales, then and only then can we get into clearing the rest of the site and exposing the rest of the site. So now you've got all that protection.
So there isn't anything on the plan that depicts that, though. The narrative is supposed to enhance that, so. The plan, and I had discussed this with Mike, and what Joe and Lou were referring to, and the one they basically depicted it visually on a plan, phase 1, access to phase 1, what, you can then narrative support that with what will happen in phase 1. And I know this can't be exact, and they did put that in there, that, this would all be subject to bringing on a contractor. And we know from the site where we did visually depict it in phases. Right, yeah.
Right, it has to be a dynamic process, because we can't, right now, we don't have a contractor. We can't speak to his means and methods to stage the site. What's important to this commission is protection of those 4 resource areas. And I think the plan that we've laid out does that by putting the first line of defense as your standard hay bales and silt fence, but this second line of defense, which is the perimeter retaining walls, and to use those as integral parts of the storm with the erosion control and sedimentation control. And then as the system comes up, as the walls come up, you're just redefining those sed basins in those same areas, and they're coming up with you, so that you get. And obviously, the higher you get, the more stable structural fill that you put on that site, the flatter you make that site, erosion control becomes much different, a much different game from that standpoint. We envision, once we have the walls all in and we're up to pads on all of these sites, the wetlands will be the areas proximate to the walls will have been long since stabilized, and we'll have a very secure site. So I think that's what I wanted to get across in the premise of our plan, that allows us the flexibility to be able to allow the contractor to then take that very defined sequencing and do what he needs to do up on the top of the site as he sees fit. Right now, we've got a site open that's 40 acres. We're implementing pretty much the same concept here. We've got perimeter retaining walls, and we're utilizing them in this similar fashion, and we have the entire 40 acres opened up. Because they needed to do it from a timing standpoint. They couldn't, open up one part of the site. There was cuts and fills, just like we have here, imports. So we needed to come up with a comprehensive plan that allowed that flexibility and that the ability to move to move around the main site as they saw fit.
One of the things too on this plan, we still the perimeter, they show this straw wattle as the primary erosion control, and that is definitely not gonna be the primary erosion control on a site like this. Minimum, you narratively updated that.
We've updated that to silt fence and hay bale.
This site begins and fails on construction sequencing, and we're convinced stormwater is likely to work with proper maintenance over time, where we are really, I'm convinced of that. I'm real reluctant, if I'm hearing perhaps, and maybe I'm hearing the tone wrong, is that they're hoping we're satisfied with the sequence we've given and perhaps close. I'm not. I think we need more, we need some more work. And I do recommend, if we can't get a subcommittee of this committee, maybe just one person to sit down with Lisa, with the applicant, to the extent that they have knowledge of what they think the construction sequence is, that's what we'll hear. But on those other two projects, we keep talking about the condo project, but remember there was the assisted living on Boston Hill, which we also got to do a very detailed construction sequence, given the terrain. That was difficult. And yet, it's one of the more successful ones.
On a site open, though, very small amount. We have not, I'm not saying the one across the street has definitely had its challenges, and that was a very level site,
Yeah.
which this is not.
Yeah, so I guess my point is that we took great pains on those, and one was extremely successful. The other one hasn't been catastrophic, but could have been had we not gone through the effort. And this one, I still have those same fears on, so I really don't think we're there yet, I'm afraid.
Well, we did the same thing with Inglewood, too. I mean,
Yes.
that was a pretty good cut.
Can I ask a question here? In lieu of putting together a subcommittee, unless that's what you want, could we ask the applicant to come back in 2 weeks with a detailed sequencing plan for our review and see if that'll do it?
Again, he may have done that. I just haven't had a chance to read it. I got it this afternoon.
I
got it this afternoon.
So let me clarify. So, a week ago, Joe had submitted the site plan that's up on your screen right now, which has a narrative or sequence on the left, and then as Joe kind of walked you through his thoughts on the graphical part of it. But just yesterday, I think, Joe, I can't keep track of my schedule now, we beefed that up. I had a conversation with Jen. We supplemented that filing with a detailed narrative, or more detailed narrative, that kind of provides the specificity I think Joe's understood.
We actually got the sequencing Monday, this plan, because we asked for it Wednesday. We were out at 2 o'clock on Wednesday, so the
Okay.
first time we saw this was Monday.
Fair enough.
And I don't think we have it yet. The plan. We've got the narrative.
You
You
got
should
this
have
in
both,
your,
yeah.
in your emailed packets on Monday, because I had it, so I included it, but we didn't get paper copies either until Monday.
So, it would be great if we could close tonight. That would certainly be most appreciated by our client, but I do hear your concerns, Joe. We're not opposed to continuing it 2 more weeks to resolve this one last construction sequencing issue, but we would want to work really hard with the commission and/or Lisa, Jen, whatever, to do whatever we can to close in 2 weeks. That is our goal, and that's the...
The problem with closing in 2 weeks is we have a 4-week meeting gap before our first meeting in January. So we really can't close because we can't issue in 21 days.
Again,
And the commission is going to want to review this order of conditions. It's not going to be adding 19 parking spots.
I feel confident that we could work with the commission to find a way to grant some relief to that 21-day period, too, if that's what it came to allow you that extra week to do what you needed to do.
It'd be more than, it'd be, like, our first January meeting is something like January 14th. I don't even know what the date is, but.
So 4 weeks.
It's pretty. Yes, no, it's probably January 11th and 25th we meet.
So if we close in 2 weeks and we resolve your remaining concerns or whatever else is open, you feel comfortable conditioning at that point, close the public hearing, you have enough information at that point to make a decision. And then, as Jen points out, you have 21 calendar days to do that. It sounds like it may go to 28 calendar days to do that. And I think that's a workable issue that we could work with the
Well,
commission.
I don't think, we can close an issue in the same meeting. We can continue from the December 14th just for the sake
Yeah,
of
that's true, too. That's
keeping it
a
open
fair
and
point, too.
issuing.
That's a fair point,
We'd still
too.
be drafting it.
I think we stormwater is
We agree.
provable.
We agree.
I mean, it's there, it's
Yes.
there, all right? But like Joe just said, this is what we're gonna do, but we don't have a contractor yet, and then once the contractor gets in, he'll decide how he wants to
Well,
do the project.
That's not, so just to be clear, we will have to do a SWIP under the NIPD's program that will have the contractor's input and detail that Joe's making reference to, and I'm assuming that will be a condition of your permit, that SWIP is provided to the commission at that time. We can only take this so far, is the point that Joe's making, to make the commission comfortable that we're going in the right direction. But it will not become final until the contractor's on board as the operator of the SWIP, and we give you the additional.
Contractor already lined up?
No.
We do not.
So the developer themselves are just developers, they're not contractors.
They'd be the owner under the NIPD's program.
Okay. So are you going to, when are you going to have a contractor on board? If you want to work with him in sequencing things, either that or you come up with a sequencing and you tell the contractor, this is what you're going to live with.
We've defined, I think, a very strong plan that can be put into place. Our only point at which the contractor needs to have input is anything that the commission may need on the things like Jen was talking about, the very detailed sequencing of what happens on the upper part of the site. What we've tried to do is with this perimeter wall system and ringing the site with set basins, it gives the contractor more flexibility to then define what's happening up on the site. All stockpiles will be 100 feet away from the wetlands and things like that, but as far as we want the ability to open up essentially the whole site, and I think those the pieces of the plan that allow us to do that are here. They're in this document, and they will be part of the order of conditions.
And just one more point on that, if I could. And do not take this the wrong way at all, but just again, for perspective, the vast majority of the site is way outside the 100-foot buffer zone. There's a very limited portion of the construction that's going to be in the buffer zone. Now, I know what you're thinking, we're thinking the same thing. Exactly, and we totally agree, and we acknowledge and accept the importance of the construction sequencing plan, but from a pure regulatory perspective, a large portion of the things that are going to be described in that SWIP and the sequencing plan are going to be outside your areas of jurisdiction, and way outside the buffer zone. So there's that balance too.
So that one piece I had lost my train of thought on, so I'd come back on, was exactly that, is that my understanding is the planning board has surrendered the stormwater question to us. I don't know if they, I'm not asking you.
They have, no,
They
I think
conditioned, as I read the decision today, conditioned it upon our final approval and any changes we may make.
That's what I want to be real careful, because exactly to Mike's point is there's only a small corner of this site that really does fall jurisdictional. But because, and then the way the Wetland Protection Act is weird is it doesn't really become a jurisdiction until there's a violation. We're trying to prevent that. And that's really where it boils all right down to. But sequencing, I think, is very much important.
Completely agree.
I would say two things. First of all, in the sequencing, one thing I did note is this sequence is the early phases, which they're absolutely right. That is the most sensitive in terms of erosion controls and so forth, and setting up that line of defense. But when you're looking at this sequencing, don't forget that there will be times when the site is paved, but those stormwater BMPs are not going to be online yet. So you need to think about when they're coming online, not just from the treatment, but the flow attenuation. In this particular case, you don't have, a lot of sensitive down gradient, receptors. This isn't going onto somebody's lawn and so forth. And the wetlands will function to do what wetlands do, which is, to help attenuate. But it's something to think about in terms of, and particularly if this gets delayed at some phase of the project because the economy tanks or what have you, you need to think about when those BMPs are coming online to do their job. The other thing I was just going to throw out is you can also condition a meeting with the contractor once they're on board with your subcommittee or whatever to kind of work out the details.
Yeah, I wasn't going to play that card. We could condition as a pre-construction
A pre-construction meeting.
but I was going to take it to the next level up that, and it requires a submission of documentation to the commission, and depending on, to the extent of what's proposed, it might actually come back, not to a hearing, but come back before the commission for
Or
approval.
you can, you can, yeah, or you can require a review of the SWIP or what have you. So that it is important to get that contractor on board before you finalize any of this, because, and it obviously does have to be something where there's going to be wiggle room to adjust as it goes along.
I think that's a great out. We can't answer the question, when will we have a contractor? We need decisions from this commission and the planning board to then line up financing, to then understand, how the project gets done, to then go out and get bids from contractors, to then.
We're very unlikely to give a lot of discretionary authority to a contractor.
No,
Very
I'm-
unlikely.
what I'm suggesting is some kind of a condition that Lisa's talking about, to have the contractor engaged in the process through a condition.
So we need to get something like that for next week. We need to get something like that, because we got to move this along.
Okay,
Yeah.
So we need to get something like that. We have to continue this.
okay.
Well,
Did you want?
I'll second your motion.
Like I
and we'll
said,
discuss.
The chairman has something to say.
if you want to do that subcommittee meeting before the next meeting, if that's possible, if
I
there's
heard you
something
volunteer for it, Joe.
Concerns.
Subcommittee of one?
Just one person, I thought he said.
Right. Well, he's the guy.
So you heard the same thing I heard, yes?
Well, and Lisa, so we
And Lisa.
Yeah.
We can continue, if, Joe, trying to take the heat off you a little bit. I know how busy you are. I mean, if it's easier. We're happy to coordinate with Lisa over the next week. I know you're busy too, but we think this is farther along than you might think. And we're just trying to get it to a point where you're comfortable closing and conditioning the balance of it.
We're trying to do the same thing, Mike.
Right.
We're trying to do the same thing, and we're not there tonight.
Right, so we understand that, we'll do, so
We want to be there at the next
But we
meeting.
want to
Yeah,
be there, yeah.
we
want-
do too.
We want to
We
get it done.
Totally
Right.
agree. So
So-
we can do that approach, Mr.
During the
Chairman.
midnight oil, get it done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the O&M plan's gonna be critical too.
So my only opportunity would be, in hedging, it's either this Friday or next Friday, and I'm hedging on this Friday. Chances are better next Friday, is when I could do it, when I could be in town here.
All right, so
Which would get us
try to schedule that for, you can review interim and maybe make suggestions.
When's that next meeting?
14th,
The week after that,
December?
December 14th.
December 14th.
So the 9th, December 9th for a meeting?
What day of the week is that?
That's the Friday.
That's a Friday. That's a good Friday.
Well, yeah.
Lisa might be out getting her confined space certification.
Yeah.
I have one.
I'll go with it.
Subcontracting, going down in there and checking it out, getting a GoPro on a stick.
I like the stick and
Yeah, well, the GoPro, that's the,
GoPro.
yeah, that's the way.
We're talking drones.
All right,
Well, why don't we work through the details with Jen offline, at least, and we would request a continuance for
We're
2
trying to do
weeks.
that.
Okay.
We're trying to do
All
that.
right, motion to
We're
continue.
trying real hard to do
I
it.
know you are.
So we
Yeah,
have
we
Joe
were
and
the
Al
first
already
to-
motioned.
You have a motion and a second. You do have a motion and a second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, and that's unanimous.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
A lot of paper.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, this is very helpful.
Yep.
So we're back to our abbreviated notice of resource area delineation, 185 Great Pond Road.
Okay.
Hopefully the ceiling's not gonna, it just keeps getting wetter and wetter up there.
You gonna get your,
You're gonna have to make a full report in the morning. Just move your computer.
an incident report,
Yeah, you're gonna have to do an after-action report, how you avoided getting wet.
and a requisition of raincoat or a umbrella, one or the other.
Right. Which one are we doing? 185 Great Pond?
Yes. Excuse me, yes.
May have just lost next Friday's window.
Oh.
Thank Thank you.
You could have called from higher authority?
Yeah, my son's
Watching the show.
overdue, and they just announced that she's getting induced next Thursday, so we're going up to the Berkshires on Friday,
Oh, boy.
tonight.
Is that your first?
Great reason to miss that.
Your third?
Maybe we should go early.
I'm sorry.
Maybe we should go before then.
Go ahead, Greg.
We have Mr. Hockworth here.
Good evening. Greg Hockman from Williams and Sparagus here representing the owners of 185 Great Pond Road. We filed an abbreviated notice of resource area delineation for the wetland resource areas on and adjacent to their property. This is, it sits up high, and I guess if you could look through the trees, it would look down at Lake Chickawick. 400 feet falls just short of the property in this corner, so the lake's down here. And there's a large BVW located behind the rear lot line that starts at a culvert that goes under a common driveway. There's an intermittent stream that flows through there. It has associated vegetation. Then it flows into another culvert under another driveway and down to the power line easement. And then the wetland, a different series, runs parallel with the, I guess it would be the easterly property boundary towards Great Pond Road, where it enters another culvert and gets into the street drainage system. The wetlands are very obvious. They're toe slope for the most part. Jennifer and I walked out there earlier this week. We don't have a DEP file number yet, so we're not going to ask the commission to close. But I'd be happy to talk more about them if you'd like me to.
Thank you. Joe?
I have no questions.
Al?
None at this time.
Jeff? Sean?
No questions.
So we just gotta wait for Joe.
Yeah, I mean, this is one,
And,
we can, as soon as they issue the number, I can do the form online, and we can approve it at the next meeting with a vote and signatures, so.
That would be great.
You don't need to come again. I did review the line, I didn't have any, there were no flag changes of any kind.
Okay, then a motion then.
We can't, well, motion to
Can't close.
continue.
Oh, motion to continue.
Motion to
Yeah.
continue. Second.
All those in favor say aye. Opposed, and that's unanimous.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so
And then-
we still have another one, right? Hidden
Moving
Road?
on to the next one, which is
Yeah, 242, 25 Hidden
25
Road.
Hidden
in
Court.
court.
Hidden Court, sorry. Court Road Boulevard.
This is Mike's in the hall.
So this one too, I went out and reviewed the delineation.
Does this need consent?
Yeah, I think you're up before them. His is still on the agenda before yours.
Okay.
Yep.
Yep.
He's 25 Hidden Court. Just a note, on the agenda, for some reason Donna put this on as 24 Hidden Court, but I did check the abutter notification and the advertisement, and both are correct, so.
Our agenda, my agenda says 25.
I corrected it,
Oh, you did,
but
correct,
when
sorry.
it was posted to the
Got it.
website and to the book at Town Hall, it said 24.
Got it.
A side note.
Is there an abutter list for this?
There is.
It's in the notice.
I'm looking, I don't think I have the notice.
No, we don't.
I have
You
the
have a
map, I
copy?
just don't have a notice. Let me just check it out while you're looking. Thanks.
So we notified everybody twice because our original abutter notification said that the hearing was going to be at the school administration building. But we notified everybody again and gave them this address within the 7 days.
I just want to make sure I wasn't on it,
Yep.
and I'm not, thank you.
Yep. It's not too far, though.
It's close, yeah.
Yeah, we discussed that in the brook, because it is sort of
I just want to make sure, I
beaver-influenced.
don't want the AG's office calling me.
We did review the BVW delineation, and as Greg can tell you, the riverfront delineation is taken from aerials because the river is quite a ways out there and is in the flooded BVW. to some extent.
Yeah, the historic boundary shows it on the other side of the wetland, but I think Jennifer and I both agree that the main thread now is right behind our client's property due to a large beaver dam that exists,
And the aerials support that.
which puts, well, almost the entire property within the 200-foot riverfront area. The BVW line shown here in green, and the 100-foot buffer zone goes right through the house. The main part of the project is the applicant started out just wanting to remove the swimming pool and the patio and to replace that area with a smaller patio and rebuild his deck within the same footprint. In looking at the project further and discussing it with us and his contractor out in the field, he also wants to create a level area back there for his kids to play. Right now it just slopes right off to the woods. So he can't gain a lot of room because of where the 100-foot inner riparian lands, but he can gain quite a bit of space. So what we've done is proposed to import fill material, lift up the grade, start the limit of work just above the 25-foot no disturb, or the 100-foot inner riparian, whichever was closer to the house, and then grade it up 2 to 1 with a vegetated slope and give him as much of a level area in the backyard that we could. We looked at putting in a retaining wall or portions of a retaining wall. It didn't gain him any space, and we'd really have to justify the retaining wall to the commission because it would be within the 50-foot. So he opted for the graded slope, which I think will work out fine. We're proposing a 12-inch diameter filter sock. Jennifer pointed out that we should put in something a little bit more substantial, straw bales and silt fence, and we're fully prepared to do that. This project also does not have a DEP file number yet. Construction access would be along the side of the house over here. And we're showing a temporary stockpile area just in case the need for one arises. I'm guessing they're going to have to pile up something at some point in time, but that's pretty much the project.
Thank you. Joe?
It's pretty straightforward. I have no questions.
Al?
No questions.
John?
Where's the, could you point out the potential vernal pool?
Yes. So it shows well on,
I printed the aerial, I think, I don't know if they'd stopped with Sean, maybe.
so it would be down here. It would be down here behind the abutters lot. And I looked at it, of course, when I looked at it, it was bone dry. It was a very dry summer. I walked right into it and then walked right out towards the beaver dam. I'd be shocked, if Mosquito Brook has fish in it, then that potential vernal pool would definitely have fish in it as well.
So when we were out there, it was flooded and it was connected to the main stream. So the definition of a vernal pool would be that there was no connection. And it's clear this is part of the floodplain. And the photos that you see there show it sort of backwatering into the pool.
Yeah.
So I think, at least on the fish aspect, Greg's probably right, that this wouldn't, I mean, not to say that there are potentially at times during the year not wood frogs in there, because
They used to
It's just growing bait instead of growing.
Right.
There used to be
wildlife.
fish in Mosquito Brook.
No, there are. Fish,
Used to stock
Mosquito
it.
Brook is a stocked brook.
Stocked.
The-
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Fish and Wildlife stocks that.
Yeah, that's it.
Every year.
And I just want to be clear, too, that I don't think that portion that gets flooded is part of Mosquito Brook. I think it's more floodplain than anything. It's definitely not primarily riverine. If it was, we'd have a lot more riverfront area on this lot, and the 100-foot inner riparian would creep up as well.
so there wasn't water, there was water in that pool when we were out there, but there wasn't water back behind the lot in that area.
I guess my question is all the disturbance proposed outside the 50-foot setback from the potential vernal pool?
I would say yes.
It's not, the problem is, what I show on there is your regulations say
certified.
No, the extended buffer goes 100 feet from the edge of the pool, and 100 feet from the edge of the pool would be halfway across the back of this property. So technically, half of the property would have a different buffer zone than But I agree, I mean, I think on the premise alone that the area is floodplain and there's fish in it, I don't think it really qualifies as a
Yeah.
vernal pool.
I mean, when they were scanning
fish
the
would-
aerials at Heritage,
does,
looking for
yeah.
big shadows and impoundments, this jumped out, and they probably tagged it as a potential vernal pool.
And I think even more so, I mean, they might have tagged it when it looked like all kinds of different things. The fact that it's dammed and now the beaver flow is in there is a
So we're
different
gonna
situation.
treat it as not a vernal pool.
It could look something different if the beavers leave that area, but currently, no. It's connected to the stream.
Okay, sorry.
They could leave.
All set.
No questions?
Done? Okay, so we have motion to continue.
So moved.
Second?
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Next, Ann.
I just, because we'll probably draft this for the next hearing as well, they do have a stone wall out there, it's not very high. I do recommend, since they'll be at the edge of what should be the 100-foot vegetated buffer, I do think they should put that wall back at the toe of their new slope or something similar.
That would be fine.
So just continue.
Rocks are there, it makes
It was
sense.
required under the hidden court order of conditions. It shows on their approved plan, so I would
Okay.
assume you would want that wall back.
Okay,
Yes.
She usually likes them
Right.
back.
see you next meeting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Malls are popular these days.
Next thing is, let's continue. Salem Street, 242-1689 Salem Street.
There we go.
Okay. Floor's yours, Phil.
Okay, I was just waiting.
Okay.
Hi, Phil Christensen here.
Maureen Harold, Millis Environmental.
So this is a bit of a difficult project in terms of procedurally, and I looked to the board for some help on this issue. We have 4 special permits here, actually. There's a Form A plan, not yet filed, to create 3 lots, 2 of which are frontage exception lots. So those are special permit applications. Also, the driveway is proposed as a common driveway, which is a special permit application. And the driveway not through your frontage is also a special permit application, because obviously one of the houses served by the common drive will not have the driveway through its frontage. So we have filed all of those with the board. Now, what affects where that driveway is located and possibly even the shape of the lots is the riverfront. So we had, and obviously wanting to keep the disturbance of the riverfront to a minimum. So we had flagged the riverfront where we felt it was. There was a defined channel. The top of the channel we thought was the riverfront. And I have some correspondence in the file with respect to that. North Environmental did the flagging of the riverfront. They located it where we have it shown on our plan. And there's been a sidewalk with Jennifer, and Jennifer has a different opinion as to where the riverfront is, which would affect the site and change where that 200-foot zone crosses onto the property and increase the amount of riverfront area on the property. And if that change is made, I would probably change the location of the driveway. So it's got us at a point where either we accept the riverfront that we thought was there, or Jennifer's idea of where the riverfront is. and then find a different way to develop this property. So the first issue is, where's the riverfront? Okay. So, and our definition is, you know, we look at the regulations, it says a change between aquatic and terrestrial environment, which is real clear. This is all presented in the reports that you've received. It's also, there's a definite bank, there's a definite channel, and you can follow it through the wetlands. It does get complicated in the fact that the wetlands there is very broad, very flat area, and it does get flooded. So because it gets flooded, there are pockets of water in the wetland. But there's a difference of about 75 feet from where we consider the riverfront to be and where Jennifer considers it to be. So that's a big difference, obviously.
Provide a little more clarity, we did discuss it at the last meeting. When I went out there, even Norse admitted that the conditions under which we first saw it, there is a backwater channel. There is an actual backwater channel. It was a channel when we first saw it. The second time we went out there, it was not a channel. The place looked like the Mississippi. The whole thing was flooded. So that presented some of the problem. When we saw the backwater channel, Maureen even admitted at that time that she had started to flag that channel because it looked like the riverfront, but it didn't go through. And so we didn't discount that, but what I did was when I went back to the office and I called DEP and I said, well, it's a backwater channel, but it isn't the main channel. It doesn't count as riverfront. And, you know, they basically said that if at mean high water, that backwater channel and the elevation of the main channel and the backwater channel are the same, then yes, it would be riverfront. And they were unequivocal about that, and they gave the same information to Maureen. You spoke to Heidi, I think I spoke to Pam. I got a message from Heidi. And Heidi and Pam agreed on the same. I then spoke, I was at the AMWS meeting, and I spoke to several consultants who have said they have run into similar situations. I didn't let Phil know that one of the things you can do is go out and do I don't know if it's bathymetry, but you can basically determine if that backwater channel and the main channel are at the same elevation and holding the same basic mean high water. That's sort of the very technical and probably somewhat expensive way to determine what that channel actually is. We could have it third-party reviewed, but even going back out there, like I said, the whole thing was full of water. It wasn't, we couldn't even tell where the backwater channel was because the whole thing was flooded. Again, owing to that sort of flat topography and big floodplain. That's where we're at. So.
If I could just add to it, when we flagged the channel, was this past year, so it was full flow. There was a definite channel at that time. And as Jen mentioned, when we went out the second time, the entire area was flooded. Well, keep in mind, we have bordering vegetated wetland, and we also have floodplain. And the floodplain comes up to almost the base of Salem Road. So I have some photographs here. But basically what the riverfront regulations say is when you have a low-flow meandering stream, you use changes in vegetation or changes in soils to define the actual bank of the perennial stream. So that's how we flagged this area.
That backwater channel, though, had the same changes in vegetation. There was the same channelized structure with the same bank. The problem is it just doesn't flow through to the other side. It just backwaters. But it was still a defined channel with changes in vegetation on each side.
I think something that might be helpful, I don't know if you saw it, but correspondence I sent in was to take a look at what the drainage area is through stream stats, and then what the D50 in the calculation of the flow was. And the D50 flow there is 5 cubic feet a second.
You can see this is the old railroad or whatever. This is the defined channel. But you can see how this comes back in here. And
But it doesn't?
It doesn't actually.
out.
It almost looks like it flows through, but my interpretation is that it stops. And this is just as much of a channel as this is, with the same banks and those same characteristics.
It's certainly not a straightforward situation.
Typically, this is the main channel along this railroad bed here. You can see it kind of straight, but you can see this other channel, and it doesn't actually go through. It kind of stops here, and that's the channel that,
Ideally, you like to have a situation like the Merrimack River, and it's a definite observable break and slope, and you have the bank, and you can flag it. And everybody's in agreement on it. But because this is a low-flow meandering stream, you flag it based on the change in vegetation. And when we were standing on Salem Road looking at the river, you have BVW and you have floodplain. I feel like what we were looking at was the river flooding in the floodplain, high water table. I think at the time
second
there was
time
some
we went
rain.
out, that was the case, that it was definitely, had overtopped its banks and was filling the floodplain. The first time we were there, that was not the case. We could walk, into the middle of the two channels easily. The second time we were out there, that was not the case.
But I definitely think the regulations say that you determine it by a difference in vegetation, predominantly aquatic or predominantly terrestrial land vegetation. And that's how we flag this. You're not going to have a red maple tree or a large growing of red osier dogwood in a river.
Right, but in that secondary channel, there was no vegetation. It was only water. That's the point, it had the same characteristics, the same banks. It was full of the same water the first time we observed it. There were no trees growing in it. Now what's filled does have red maple in it and red osier dogwood and all those things. But the secondary channel had no vegetation in it, and it had banks. And that's what we observed the first time.
I think it's a question of whether that's actually the stream, and that's why I provided the. Well, that's why, if you refer to the letter I wrote on.
If you look at page 2 of the handout, the definition of mean high water is right in front of you.
And I think the first time we saw the situation, it was mean high water. The second time we saw the situation, it was above mean high water.
Well, what's tricky is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think out in the field, you had said you would feel comfortable with the riverfront being from an RF7 flag to the A7 flag. So essentially, that would affect the project. So we have RF7 here connecting to A7. That would that would extend the riverfront from A7 all the way onto the lot. So that's why we're here in front of you tonight to discuss it, because obviously that would affect the project.
Well, historically, when we've had a dispute between staff and applicant, we usually go for a third-party review to decide what is what. I mean, I don't want to pick sides.
Well, this is really, this is where the wetland science, and we know it's a subjective science, but this is where the science becomes reviewable only by people that are at your level of training. I'm not a wetland scientist, and I can read the regs, I can understand them, and I can understand exactly what you're telling me, but I'd feel much more comfortable if we had a third-party independent peer review. If we're disparate, I think we got to go that way.
But Phil, you made your opening comments, you had mentioned that you've got special permits pending, was based on, and again, no challenge of professionalism of accuracy or anything, it's just a different interpretation. We understand that only as being the issue. If you guys were to acquiesce, what does it do to your proposal? What does it change?
It substantially changes the riverfront, I don't know, Maureen, should I go over there?
Okay.
It's just, as I said, from that R7 flag to A7 flag is approximately 75 feet. So if the river goes from here to this location, then this line goes up to here, okay? And it might be less disruptive to the riverfront area to move this driveway over, maybe over in this location. Okay, so that's part of my problem, is that, we had it here because this tended to be between grades and riverfront. This is where we had the least disturbance of riverfront area. But if that moves up, then this is gonna move up, and then we'd have riverfront area up in here, so we might move the driveway over to here.
So if it does move, if that's the impact, and that's what happens from a design perspective, does that change your strategy? Does it change the planning board's outlook on the special permit?
No, I
application?
don't think it would change the planning board at all, but it's what, I'd have to modify what's in there, obviously, and apply for it, which is fine. But.
So I guess the question I'm asking is, we can fight the battle and go through the effort and get consultants and in the end still go on and on about what the hell is the jurisdiction, or we could just acquiesce and determine if the path of least resistance is to simply redesign the driveways that may be perfectly palatable to us and the planning board.
Well, and that's a way to approach it. Now, one of the issues with regard to that is the use of a limited project on this, limited project through the riverfront.
Right.
And if that's acceptable to the board, which would cause more disturbance than 5,000 square feet, if we file that way, is that something that's going to be acceptable, or is that something the board is going to resist? Because if you'd accept it, then...
5,000 square feet or 10% of the plot.
Well, no, it's 10% of the riverfront area, which is only 3,000 feet at present.
No, it's 10% of the...
Look, if the goal is
10%
to
of the
minimize the
riverfront.
impact of the riverfront, and we're,
or the-
well, if they're willing to accept what we might call a conservative line, what are we losing here?
DEP, they're not going to comment on the delineation because they didn't go out to the site, but they didn't comment on the project at all. They've already issued no comments.
If there wasn't a road between the two, I
Right.
wouldn't think we'd be having, I wouldn't be having this type of conversation, but it would seem to me the path of least
It wasn't an
resistance.
issue for the drive that's across the street. On the other side, they had the riverfront. The riverfront is much closer on their lot. It's right at the toe of the road when you're at that point.
But as of, with this design right now, I think there's about 4,800 square feet within the riverfront. So we're just under the 5,000 foot threshold right now.
So we didn't file as a limited project.
So we could amend,
We could amend and file as a limited project as long as the board finds that acceptable.
If you're looking
And the criteria would be your only access through your own frontage
Correct.
Right.
to an upland area.
And we've done alternatives. We could have a 6-lot subdivision.
This is the
here.
alternative.
You'd be more qualified, Phil, honestly, you'd be more qualified with the limited project than to ask us to make a decision on science.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, a science decision would have to go to a third party. We're not gonna do that.
No, I understand, but
We're
I
not gonna
just
have a
wanted
box.
to get that limited project issue.
But you'd qualify for the limited project. In other words, you're asking us if we'd accept it, you'd qualify.
right.
So,
I believe they would.
if you qualify for it, I can't see why we wouldn't accept it. We wouldn't be doing you a favor. That's
Right.
what we're trying to avoid. The
I know you don't wanna get our favors.
appearance of impropriety is what we're trying to avoid. So the delineation, I think you've got to buy into the delineation, my one opinion, and propose it that way. And
Jack? All right, so
I guess you got the ball.
Okay, so we'll refile then, not refile, but modify the application to be a limited project, and we'll accept this as being a riverfront.
So Jen, it was, you wanted RF7 flag to wetland flag 7A?
I mean, that's the hard part. I don't know if it looks any different now, probably not after today's and rain.
After today's
It's-
rain, the whole thing will be a little...
Right, so,
I mean, if you're comfortable with that, then we can push forward. If you want to take another look, we could go
I think
and do that.
you had overlaid the delineation on an aerial, I think,
Yeah.
in your filing.
That one?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much, because we confirmed. So what your main channels.
It's actually
That's
the
right.
promised land.
spent a lot of time on this one.
The river.
I know, you just gotta, let me start.
This
No,
guy.
it's-
Where's,
Jen, if you-
aerials that I have?
Get aerials
They're
right
all-
Oh, this is it.
Two there, though, right?
All right, so you're gonna wanna
What
keep,
we kind of contended was, it ended sort of here, and then, whether it ends here or it ends here was kind of the discussion of that sort of more open area. But
What we would do is just come back in, and we just come right over to here, and that would be all riverfront right there.
Okay.
We'd tie into that.
sort of approximating.
Okay, so
Well,
you,
you guys have to agree or this thing doesn't work.
Right. No, there's
Whatever you do is
they're
an
just,
approximation.
right. At this point, we can't determine in the field, so.
all right, so we need a motion to continue.
So moved.
All those in
Thank you.
favor, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, that's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you.
Maureen, we can discuss.
Okay.
242-1392, 810 Salem Street.
This actually is, I looked it up earlier today because I was out there meeting with the homeowner, new homeowner, didn't get the order of conditions. Prior owner had redone the fence and taken down the post and rail that you had required remain in perpetuity along the 100-foot riverfront area.
I guess it wasn't as permanent as I hoped.
No.
I rest my case.
That was the last one we approved.
I rest my case. When you talk about post and rail, you...
So they did put up along a good portion of the, a white vinyl fence,
Yeah.
but they do need to connect something along the edge of the driveway to the road. They just bought the house, it's December.
Yeah.
I said, could you please write me something that says you'll come up with a permanent solution and we'll continue this to a date certain. They picked June, so I say continue to the June 28th meeting, and I think we'll have full compliance. They were very eager to understand what it is they could do. They have copies of the order.
So you
they
want
have
this
copies of
continued to
the
June?
approved plan. Yep.
So moved.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, and that's unanimous. Okay, general business, which you have to sit on.
If 242-1544, I have a conflict, I'll be leaving the room.
There you go.
So Heidi reviewed the plants. One of the arborvitaes is dead. The remainder of the plants are there. If you recall, this has been all about the planting plan for a while now. It was a drought year. There was proof of of maintenance of the drainage system in 2014. But now the homeowner is responsible. So he doesn't have recent proof of maintenance. Because the homeowner, it's been turned over to the homeowners association. So I don't know how you want to deal with that. At the time that he did come in for the original COC, he had done the maintenance, the plants were in. But that's what we've got.
So we have one dead plant.
One dead arborvitae, which, if you look at the photos,
What do we have for Vaughn?
I don't know, I didn't. Here's the photos of the plants. They're the same. No, not December. We're past. You could put something in the ground, it might, if it's hard frost tomorrow, that thing will have no root system. It'll pop up in spring and it may or may not survive.
What do we have for Vaughn?
We have bond, but we're not gonna seize bond over a dead arborvitae.
Yeah. All right.
It's not a native species, it's not providing any buffer, it's really a screen for the neighbor, isn't it?
I don't know what it was. We fought so long and hard to get plantings out there. The majority of them have survived. I'm
All
not
right,
really
so
concerned about the one
If
dead
there aren't any
arborvitae.
questions, I'll look for a motion.
I move that we surrender.
That's really how everything is on this front's gonna
We have a
go.
motion, do we have a second to the surrender?
I second. Well, I guess the motion ought to be to issue a certificate of compliance. Certificate of surrender? COS?
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, and that's unanimous.
Okay.
And the next one is Half Mile Hill Connection
So-
schedule.
you asked that this formally be on the agenda, because they are proposing to install a trail that will connect to, you know, the town-owned open space, which you can see on this here plan. Friends of North Andover Trails supports it. The applicant of the Edgewood project is going to construct it, or is willing to make sure it's clear from the end of their trail to access our trail. I will seek TTOR approval, because they hold the CR on the property, so if
Okay,
all that's
any questions?
waiting is your approval as custodians of the property.
My only concern before was the property line. Again, it's shown on the plan that the gate, et cetera, to Half Mile Hill is not on Half Mile Hill property.
Town council was gonna look into that, I will ask about that.
Yeah, the preschool, there.
Yep, the applicant sounded pretty realized it before they came in the meeting and acknowledged that
It
fact.
may actually, I mean, if anything, and this is what we should research, is it's probably part of that easement to access our property, but we should know.
That was on the parking lot access question down below, but with regards to the trail.
That has no
No.
bearing on the trail.
Well, yeah, it doesn't have to do with the trail, but it does with the proposal. Because if there is a time to do something about it, and we've been using trespassing on land, now would be the time to do it. Well, we have an opportunity, and this is in front of us.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, I will ask council about that tomorrow.
All right, so we can approve the trail.
Right.
Okay, so we need a motion.
So this is just to approve the trail?
Yep.
Well, I think we have two aspects, right? We have to approve the trail and grant permission for that trail to be on our open space, and subject to, we're approving the trail subject to approval of TTOR's permission to extend the trail on their property.
Nope. It's on our property. TTOR holds the conservation restriction on our property. So anytime we do something, we run it by them to say,
So right behind,
that's Edgewood property.
that's their own property.
That's their own property. TTOR
It
will have
ties over to Wyatt's Hill,
will
but
have the
I got you.
conservation restriction on that property as well, but that's not our problem.
Okay,
So all we are doing is approving the trail as
Just that last
having
leg.
care, custody, and control of Half Mile Hill.
okay.
We didn't approve this in the last meeting?
No, because it wasn't formally on the agenda, it was a discussion item.
Right.
So
Right, so
Sean made a motion.
Second.
Joe made the second, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, and that's unanimous.
Awesome.
Can we,
It's going much faster than
I
I
know.
know, no kid, can we
I'll step
table?
out.
Is,
Although Vanessa's here to do the CR, so we should bring him back in.
oh, okay.
That was pretty close to 8:30, right?
Yeah, right.
Was it like 10?
What time is it?
5 minutes, 10.
Almost 10.
We're doing the CR.
Oh, well. I knew this was gonna take a while.
All right.
We're close.
Jen says we can get going on the CI, she'll be right in.
Okay,
I think I blew up your pen,
that's okay.
the spring
have
exploder.
several.
Sorry,
We'll just
I owe you a
take
pen, all right?
Yeah, good.
You set it anywhere at all?
No,
No,
she's taking-
we can proceed.
Okay, so, I believe in your packets, I included the latest and hopefully final draft of the conservation restriction that the town is acquiring on the Leonard property, with Greenbelt. You approved a version of this back in May. That was prior to the State Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs Division of Conservation Services review of the document, and unbeknownst to us, by the time they got around to reviewing it, even though we did submit it not long after May, in August, they issued a new Model CR, and they didn't actually get to reviewing it until after that. And they really wanted the boilerplate, basically everything after Section 2 to follow the boilerplate exactly. And the new boilerplate is exactly the same as the old, it's just rearranged in different places with a little bit of wordsmithing here and there, so that is new. There's one new provision to allow the Leonards and any future landowner to park in the fields temporarily for any pick-your-own activities in the future, or if some future landowner has a Christmas tree farm or what have you. That was run by the state as well, even though that was added in afterwards, and that was approved. So I really just, before I bring this to you for signature, I wanted to give you an opportunity to ask me any questions about the revisions that were made.
Joe?
I have no questions.
Al?
No, I don't have any.
Jeff?
Okay.
Sean?
Thank you for redoing it.
Sure. Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's a great, it's a stronger and clearer document.
We made you, I feel like we should ask questions
I
all night long.
No, I feel like we should
Give
let
her
her,
a pass.
we should let her go.
Do you have any questions? All right.
I reviewed it, town council's reviewed it. We didn't have any major questions, but, I mean, when it comes due on the 14th, we want to make sure everybody's going to sign it. So if you didn't have a chance to read it closely and want to read it more closely, like the next 2 weeks is kind of crucial to making sure everybody's on the same page.
And I should say the other major addition is that the state, when there's a co-holder, a co-holder of a CR, the state wants us now to designate a primary grantee and a secondary grantee, where the primary is the one predominantly responsible for CR stewardship and enforcement. Greenbelt always offers to do that, since we have stewardship staff and we have a regular monitoring program for all of our conservation restrictions. So along with that, we typically do a memorandum of understanding. In this case, we're recording it with a conservation agreement. So that's going to be Exhibit C to the CR, and I'm currently going through that with town council to make sure that all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed with that as well. But it basically just says we agree to be the ones, on the ground, making sure that conservation restriction is always enforced, and we will keep the town in the loop on all correspondences with the landowner.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
Is it ever usual for, in this case, where the landowners are going to continue to live and work on the property, is it ever usual where they would be the primary grantees, or?
No, because the grantee is the grantee is defined as the entity that is receiving the conservation restriction, holding the conservation
Gotcha.
restriction.
Okay, so-
By
It's
definition,
only
they
the-
can't be.
Exactly.
Yeah.
By definition, they can't be.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
So they're allowed to live and use it?
They are the grantor.
Grantor?
Yeah.
And so I got you now.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Deb did review it and pointed out that in town council is changing, that it shouldn't be $1,600 good anymore.
Yeah, I
So-
found that in a couple places too.
Yeah,
the
so
other one you showed me,
It
yeah.
is, it is being
120.
updated. So Deb read it,
Indeed.
legal mind.
Yep.
Keen legal minds
At
here.
least the first page
The
of it.
keen legal minds on the.
No, that was on page 3 or 4. I sent it and she got that like before I had even opened the
Wow,
document.
yeah.
so-
Chairman of the CS subcommittee.
Right.
You're a member.
Since you
don't
lost
know
the
it yet.
harborman's position, yes, harbor master
She's
position.
not the
We lost that.
I know.
We were overpowered on that.
I think we're good.
We're good.
All right.
Yeah.
I'll
So-
see you
Well,
on
thank
the
you
14th
again.
then.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry for the.
Do we need a motion
Nope, not yet.
to continue? No, to continue. We don't need a motion.
Yes, continue to the 14th.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Right.
We just love
Opposed,
making
that's
motions.
unanimous. And we have decision.
We have one decision?
Yes, we do. 242-1691, 114 sidewalks.
1691, there it is.
It's yellow, but it's not applicable.
So most of what you see in this one, all the yellow, for the most part, needs to be removed because this is a state filing only. We agreed that they would respect the local wetlands, but that they weren't going to file under the bylaw. They do have outstanding orders, and I don't think we've ever enforced with Mass DOT that we aren't issuing another order because it never is on the same property, but I'm gonna, at a minimum, go after them to close out the other 125 project around the corner it seems like that's been done for a while and should probably be closed out. So I'm gonna add that to condition 27, that outstanding order. So we can't enforce 29, that's a local bylaw thing, so they can get as many extensions as they want. I don't think we should say they can't do a limited project crossing, because again, if the state wants to cross a wetland, it's gonna happen. The buffer zone, the 2550, again, is a local thing. 48, I don't think we've ever bonded the state. I can't think of any time we have.
We bonded the contractor, but not the applicant. So, I mean, we could potentially bond the contractor that's doing the work, if they're gonna sub it out.
I don't think we've ever bonded the contractor.
We haven't? Sure we
I
have.
looked at,
would think
Berry
the state
Pond, we
would
might have?
ticked off at that,
I think with,
because they're paying for it.
I don't think so.
Bond, then the contractor's gonna charge
The state.
Okay,
the state.
all right.
So there would be no Form A, because we're not transferring ownership of the right-of-way. They're not gonna submit annual 5-year maintenance logs, so I think we can just, we'll just hope they do maintenance. Again, underground fuel storage, fertilizers, no snow stockpiling, and pavement solutions are not our jurisdiction, so.
So moved.
second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That's unanimous.
It's a toothless object. Just move it.
Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That's unanimous.
That's it, Mr. Medusa.